Hello, good morning, everyone. I am Bruce James. I'm a CASA board member and day job, I'm the Chief Engineer for Product Safety and Compliance with AGI. And welcome to the 2023 Annual CASA Conference. I'd just like to start out acknowledging that our work spans many territories and treaty areas, and we're grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are with us today, those who have gone before us and those who inspire us. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes, and we're thankful that we can create, collaborate, live, and work here. We support community efforts to sustain a relationship with Indigenous peoples based on respect, dignity, trust, and cooperation in the process of advancing truth and reconciliation. We're so grateful to have many of you joining us for the first day of our conference. Today, we're going to hear from some great speakers about inclusion, diversity, and equity and safe workplaces, as well as hear from two members of the Board of Directors from the Ontario Beef Farmers about how they have implemented ED in their work. We will then end the day with a panel of all of today's presenters, where we will ask them some questions and take the audience's questions as well. It will be a very educational day. I would also like to take a minute to thank our conference sponsors. It is thanks to them that we were able to offer free registrations for this year's conference. Thank you to our conference supporters, John Deere Canada and Safe Work Manitoba, and to our conference helper, Syngenta. Just as a reminder, your cameras and microphones will be disabled for presentations. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. CASA staff will monitor these questions and share these during the Q&A period or during the panel at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Simultaneous interpretation is also offered for the conference. In your meeting or webinar controls, just click the interpretation button, which is the globe symbol at the bottom center, and then click French. All presentations will be recorded and shared to all registered delegates following the conference. If you require any of the conference presentation materials translated, please contact Megan Truxall with CASA. Just a bit about CASA before we get started as well. CASA works with partners to support initiatives that equip producers, their families, and their workers with the information and tools needed to make farms a safe place to live, work, and play. CASA's vision is to support safe and sustainable agriculture where healthy Canadian farm communities thrive. Their mission is to engage with community partners and to promote safety, excuse me, and to promote safety and health in agriculture, providing leadership, support, and resources. In an average year, Canada mourns the loss of over 100 adults and children due to agricultural fatalities. Canada's agricultural sector is one of the most hazardous industries in which to work. Producer groups, nonprofits, government bodies, industry, and researchers formed what is now the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, or CASA, in 1993 to respond to issues of health and safety in agriculture. As a national nonprofit organization, CASA promotes farm safety in the agricultural sector. CASA works with partners in government, business, and farming organizations across the country to support initiatives that equip producers, their families, and their workers with the information and tools needed to make farms a safe place to live, work, and play. CASA is governed by a 7-person board of directors drawn from a membership base that includes individuals, organizations, government, and businesses. All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce our first conference speaker, Shalyma Cambridge. Shalyma is an executive coach, facilitator, and frequent speaker, passionate about the development of courageous leadership, inclusive practices, and demonstrated commitment to diversity. She brings a deep understanding of complex organizations and over a decade of experience executing communication and change management strategies, developing and facilitating training, and coaching in a variety of settings. As a child of parents who chose to immigrate to Canada from the Caribbean, Shalyma grew up straddling two cultures. This experience afforded her the ability to engage with empathy and understanding across difference, see clearly the challenges and shortcomings with regard to equity within society, and value the power of community building and storytelling in shaping better futures. Her unique perspective eventually drew her to the field of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI. As both a partner and director of client solutions within Vancouver-based EDI consultancy, HRX, Shalyma is immersed in all facets of consulting, training, development, and coaching to help organizations build equity-conscious leaders and work environments nationally. Outside of work, you'll find Shalyma spending time with her husband and two energetic kids. Welcome, Shalyma.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and hello, everyone. Nice to be with you here. I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll get started. And there you go. So welcome, everyone, to Foundations of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It's a pleasure to be here with you during your conference. I do want to first start by acknowledging the territory that I'm joining you from and that HRX operates from. Our primary offices, while we have folks across the country, are located in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is known as the territory of the Coast Salish peoples. And more specifically, where our offices are located is on the land of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish First Nations, as well as the Musqueam Indian Band. I am located just outside of that, so I'm zooming into you from the land of the Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen First Nations, also known as Surrey. And as we get into our content today, I want you to continue thinking about your location. Where are you located? What is the history of not just the land, but also the peoples that have stewarded that land and continue to do so? Keeping that mindful as we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and whose voices we hear within these conversations and who we may not, who we may need to make more effort to listen to. So I'll share with you just a little bit about HRX. You heard a bit about myself, so that's a bit about what drew me to this work of HRX, being able to support organizations and trainings and workshops just like this, all centered around equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as supporting organizations in assessing almost the lay of the land, you could say, when it comes to who's in their organizations, how do people experience inclusion and equity across different demographics. And of course, data is a huge part of that, to be able to set goalposts for where organizations are currently, and then think about where you want to go to and be able to measure against that. So within this work, what has been really important to us is the ability to work with such a variety of clients, from the public sector, the private sector, for nonprofits as well, and really be able to get a sense of the different types of experiences people are having in workplaces and within different industries. This has been a huge privilege of ours to be part of this work. And I know on here it says delivered by experts, but one of the things I like to share about expertise is that you have to continuously be learning. And in our work, we always say we don't know everything. It's always a continuous learning journey, which I'm inviting all of you into as well. So for today, as we continue this learning journey, we want to focus some objectives around our time together. And so the first is really to define the key terms related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We'll be differentiating between social equity and equality and really understanding what is that difference between equity and equality. We'll also look at bias and discrimination and how these create barriers to social equity. And finally, applying a framework for us to take into an active role in supporting social equity. So during our time together, I like to share some guiding principles for engagement. I take these from an organization called Human Systems Dynamics, and they deal with complexity in organizations, with really solving those big issues, those big scary problems that sometimes organizations find themselves in, but really being able to bridge across difference and have people have real conversations that could solve problems that they're seeing within their organizations. And so I offer these 4 guidelines or principles for engagement, really as reflective statements for us to think about how we engage with each other, but also how we engage with this content around equity, diversity, and inclusion, which can be quite complex in many situations. So what they offer are these 4 statements. Would love to see in the chat maybe which ones are resonating with you as you hear these. I'll share which ones resonate with me almost on a daily basis. The first is turning judgment into curiosity. Whenever we're confronted with something that might challenge our thinking, or even when we realize, oh, you know what, maybe I could have done that differently, or maybe I should have done something differently in the past, we can get judgmental of others, but also of ourselves. And so I invite you in those moments to think about moving that experience or that feeling into a place of curiosity and asking questions for, okay, well, how could I do something different going forward? Or, how could I understand this perspective differently? The second is turning disagreement into shared exploration. And again, we may be all coming from very different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives. And so we're bound to disagree on different things. And so what I encourage you in those moments is to not just sit in the disagreement, but really find opportunities to share in exploration and better understanding, finding those common values that connect us and allow that to be the basis for engaging with others. The third is turning defensiveness into self-reflection. And this is our opportunity to check in on those feelings in the pit of our stomach when we get defensive over something, or over something that someone may have said that's different from our experience or our perspective. Instead of sitting in that defensiveness, really allowing ourselves to ask better questions as to why we might be reacting in that way and how could we do things differently so we could engage fully. And the last one is turning assumptions into questions. And so this, again, I said I'd let you know which ones resonate with me. Would love to see in the chat perhaps which ones are resonating with you. But these last 2, turning defensiveness into self-reflection and turning assumptions into questions, are big ones for me. And really being able to ask better questions, not assuming where someone's coming from or what their perspective is or what their intent is, but really asking better questions to better understand. So would love to see in the chat, perhaps which ones might be resonating with you. Maybe it's number 1 or 2, 3, or 4. Maybe it might be a few of them. If anything is coming to mind for you as key ones, please share in the chat. And I invite you to not just think about these as how we engage today, but also how you might engage into the future as you're having conversations around EDI or other challenging topics that could come up within workplaces. How much you lean on any one of these to support those conversations. Okay, seeing in the chat here, turning judgment to curiosity, always striving to learn about what others are going through, absolutely, where they're coming from. Wonderful, thanks, Tammy. All of the above, but learning is important. So curiosity and questions, absolutely, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, in many ways, all of these really connect together. And sometimes it depends on the day, which one might be resonating with you most at that moment, or the one that you might have to most reflect on in that moment of challenge or conversation. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those in the chat. Okay, so for the rest of our time together, how we're going to organize this is we have a couple different ways to engage. So of course, directly through the chat, just as you already have started doing, but there's also Q&A function. So if there's any specific questions you have, I would love for you to enter those into the Q&A. I'll try my best to get to all of those towards our end of our time. But if you miss anything, then that's a great way to make sure we have all of those questions on record and could follow up on those questions as well. The other way that we're going to interact is through Menti. So throughout our time together, I have a few different areas where we can input our answers, our thoughts, our comments through something called menti.com. If you want to get a different device ready right now, you can always go to www.menti.com. I'll put that in the chat as well. And when it's time to go into the poll for that, I'll give you a code to enter. The great thing about Menti is that it's anonymous, so you can share your thoughts and really reflect on what other people are sharing is there as well. And I'll be able to give you back all the comments that everyone has shared. But it's a great way to get to collate some of the thinking from a group in this way. Okay, so for the first part of our talk, I'm going to focus on social equity and privilege. And my question to you, you could enter some stuff in the chat here if you'd like, is what is your understanding of the left-handed experience? So anyone here who might be left-handed, or perhaps you're not, perhaps you know someone who is, perhaps a family member or someone close to you who is, or perhaps you have no connection whatsoever and you don't know. But would love to see what is your understanding of the left-handed experience, anything that comes to mind, or just reflect on what you might have seen. So I'm seeing in the chat here, scissors are hard for left-handed folks. Okay, yep, that's definitely one that comes up quite frequently whenever I ask this question. Anything else that comes to mind? And I'm going to start sharing a couple as well on the screen too, as you might think about these. So, oftentimes when I ask this question, a few things come to mind. Definitely the scissors come up. And then also thinking about going to the bank and having that pen mounted automatically to the right-hand corner, assuming that everyone will be using their right hand to grab that pen. So there's a lot of assumptions made in our world, right? Especially a world that is so designed for right-handed folks. So when you have that comment of scissors are hard for left-handed folks, it's really because it's oftentimes scissors are designed for right-handed use. And so my daughter, who's left-handed, and my husband, who's left-handed, I'm right-handed, I really never would have noticed all these different things that are designed for right-handed use until I saw her growing up and had to go every year to buy scissors at the store, finding the left-handed ones that are going to be easier for her to use because they're designed with her in mind. I'm seeing scribbler coils, so probably very similar to these spiral notebooks on the right-hand corner picture. So my daughter's constantly complaining about these getting in the way. Zippers, buttons, fasteners on clothes are often also designed for right-handed use. Things like can openers and a lot of different appliances, settings and materials that we use, tools that we use either in the kitchen or outside, are also designed for right-handed use. I've also learned that spatulas and knives are often designed or serrated on the edge that are designed for best use with the right hand. And then the bottom right-hand corner picture of chairs, desks that are stationary in what looks to be a college or university classroom are very familiar to me. I met my husband in a classroom just like this. He's also very tall, so he'd have to contort himself to fit into these desks that were stationary and built for really one size of body. And then also he'd have to either search for the one left-handed one or there would be none in the classroom. So he'd also have to contort himself to fit in, but also to find a comfortable writing position with these desks, which are so often designed for right-handed use. So I asked this question because this is one way to start understanding this experience of privilege. When we're in a world that is so clearly designed with so many uses of right hand in mind when it comes to materials and tools, processes, procedures, and not always considering a left-handed experience. One way to describe this might be having something of value that is denied to others simply because of the group they belong to and not because of anything that they've done or failed to do. So my daughter has not deserved or done anything in the world to deserve a world that doesn't always consider her use of her left hand and how, having scissors that are designed for right-handed use are just not going to be the best for someone who's using their left hand. And so there's all these things in our world that we didn't really do anything to either deserve or not deserve when it comes to materials that are designed for either right-handed or left-handed use. Another way to break down privilege is through an understanding of advantage and power. So advantage is having something of value that should be available to everyone, but is only given to some. One experience that comes to mind is my daughter playing ukulele last year at school. And so the school is really great in giving ukuleles to all the kids. Parents and caregivers didn't have to go out and buy those things out of pocket. However, they didn't consider hand usage. And so my daughter received hers. She's the only left-handed person in the classroom. And I had to go back for 2 weeks to get restrung so that she could use it in a left-handed way. So for 2 weeks, all other kids had an advantage. They were able to use their ukuleles, play them, get familiar with them, get instruction from the teacher, whereas my daughter had to wait for an extra 2 weeks before she was able to use it. So that's an understanding of advantage in relation to privilege. Another aspect of privilege is power, having control, authority, or domination over others, or being perceived to be part of a group that has these powers. So in this case, one way you might look at that is the power that is held within administration or teaching staff. They have the power to decide how they're going to evaluate these kids. They could say, okay, after 2 weeks of having your ukulele, we're going to evaluate everyone. And that's at this specific date. Well, those 2 weeks have come and gone, and my daughter didn't have access to her ukulele. So with power, we either can use that for good to recognize some of the disadvantages and advantages that are inherent with our system or baked into how people access systems, or we could choose not to use that power in a good way. And so by making that stern date that everyone gets evaluated by, my daughter would have been at a disadvantage in that stern date and been directly affected by the power that decisions who has power and who can make those decisions. The challenge, though, is that privilege is often invisible to those who have it. And so this can directly impact our understanding of fairness. When we think about fairness, if I'm only thinking about things from my perspective, I might think that treating everyone the same as me is fair. If I'm that person at the top of the hill who can easily reach that apple with just the support of one box, I may think that giving everyone the exact same support will mean that everyone has the same opportunity and advantages as I do. However, when we are within systems that are inherently unfair, whether it's systems that allow products, musical instruments, tools to be designed from one perspective, from a right-handed perspective, and ignore the needs of those that are left-handed, then we're actually not providing the same opportunities to everyone. We're actually just reinforcing that same unfairness in that system. So what we really need to move to in order to understand social equity is by understanding that if our systems are unfair, we have to do things to correct that. So that might mean after 2 weeks of student use of ukuleles, we can test for how people are using those ukuleles, but only after 2 weeks that each person has had access to those ukuleles. So we're correcting how we are using that system by not just giving a blanket statement for everyone getting tested at the same time when not everyone had the same access to begin with. So the challenge here is that it's not just left-handedness and right-handedness that impacts how we experience the world. There's many different ways in which we can experience the world, whether that is through skin color and how people perceive skin color, or how there's different perceptions of stereotypes around skin color, how people are treated when it comes to skin color, or when it comes to formal education or access to formal education, our abilities or disabilities, our sexuality, neurodiversity, our mental health or body size. All of these things can have an impact on the privileges that we experience within the world around us, or marginalizations or disadvantages that may be creating barriers to access. Things like access to housing, our wealth, language, gender, citizenship, all of these things could have an impact on how we experience this world. So moving away from just thinking about left-handedness and right-handedness, I want to give you a sense or an opportunity to think about what ways that privilege and marginalization plays a role, either in your life or the life of others. And so this is where we're going to do our first Mentimeter. If you already have either a separate device or web page up, you can use your laptop or computer or a phone or a tablet if you'd like to go to this. Just go to www.menti.com. The code you're going to enter is right at the top of the screen here as well. It's 5251-7211. And once you enter that in, you'll be met with this question: what other aspects of identity might play a role in creating an experience of privilege or marginalization? So I'm going to share that screen and would love to get you to enter in some thoughts. What aspects of identity might have an impact on how you experience the world? Great, so I'm already seeing on here physical abilities, absolutely. I'm going to just copy this link in the chat here as well in case anyone needs to access it differently. Let me copy that. Okay, so that's another way to access the Mentimeter as well. But physical abilities is absolutely a case of how you might experience the world differently. And in many cases, you might have someone who has an immediate change to their physical abilities, and then could start to understand how that might that continued experience might be different for others. I know that when I broke my right ankle, sorry, it was a huge learning curve for me as to how people experience the world, even from driving, from being able to get in and out of vehicles, or even just being able to get in and out of buildings, the accessibility that may or may not be there. Where you live, I'm saying your accent, hairstyle, absolutely. All of these things could be forms of judgment that people place on someone, but also what people may perceive about you based on how you show up across these things. Gender, absolutely. The interests you have, yeah. So you can just imagine coming out back after a weekend and talking about the things that you've done or the hobbies you've participated in over the weekend. And if everyone in your office also goes camping, that's a really great way to build up that camaraderie. But if you're someone who doesn't participate in camping or does something very different to others, there could be that barrier that's created if people don't understand the different interests that we have. How you may dress or intergenerational wealth, yeah. Access to even having that intergenerational knowledge or access of how to handle certain types of wealth or access certain opportunities, access and the cost of education, yeah. So even where we live could have a big impact on our access to education, or even people in our background. If we come from a family where several people have gone to post-secondary education, there could be a familiarity with that, but cost could be a huge barrier for some folks as well. Physical strength, cultural background, seeing economic status in here, race, culture, education, absolutely. Stigma, labels, and that could cover a large range of things, right? So when you think about labels, they could so often be connected to stereotypes that we create about people. So even the act of labeling someone, could connect all these different areas of thinking to that person without being aware of all the different things that comes with that label. Marital status, absolutely. Different types of family statuses or networks. If you have, a good close network of friends or family around you or not, all of these things could impact privilege or marginalization. Neurodivergence, absolutely. We have a range of different ways that we think and operate and connect with people, but when that's not always accepted or understood within workplaces, it could absolutely create barriers. Seeing religion in here, community, facilities, opportunities, support systems. Yeah, so even access to facilities, depending on where you live, you may have access to community centers, to libraries, to social hubs, and other places may not. And so it's thinking about what types of community access do people have. Learning style, absolutely, how you take in information and whether or not you're in systems that respect the different ways that people take in information and provide information in those different formats. Wonderful. Citizenship is on here, wonderful, and visible physical disabilities, yes. So there could be a lot of judgment when people see a physical disability. And in the same way, there could be lots of judgment when you don't see those physical disabilities and make assumptions about someone's capabilities or not. Really great answers here. Okay, wonderful. Some great answers on here. I'm going to allow you to continue to add on to here till we get to our next Mentimeter. But thank you so much for entering in these. I'm going to share my screen again for our next bit of content. And so really just taking this question away as well to think about in your own life, how does privilege and marginalization show up for you and the experiences that you have as well? One statement that I want to leave you with this section is that when we are accustomed to privilege, equity may feel unfair. So for that person who perhaps just needs that one box to access that opportunity of reaching that apple, it may seem unfair when we suddenly see that the person beside us gets 2 boxes or the person over there gets 3 boxes. And so those are those moments to really start thinking about where does privilege show up for us, and what kind of corrections in privilege and marginalization are being provided through equity, through ensuring that, yes, some resources have to be different for some folks because of how the systems were created around that, around how people interpret accent or the education that people have had access to or in access to, how people view physical disabilities or not, and all the different things that you've added onto the Menti. Okay, so you've already started this conversation around bias and discrimination, because many of the different things that you've added to that Menti poll are really sources of bias and then discrimination. And so I want to talk a bit about this now. When we look at how organizations understand equity and the need for addressing equity, what they found was that in 2017, 87% of leaders surveyed thought that social equity was a priority. So there's clearly, insight into the fact that many people experience the world differently, and that is not just outside of organizations, it's also within organizations. This poll was done in 2017, so I can imagine that in 2023, that number at 87% is much higher. The challenge, though, is that there's still a big gap in how people experience the world and the outcomes that we are seeing. So a couple places where this shows up is even just in CEOs. So this study was done in the US, but quite similar to what you might see here in Canada. When it looked at the top 1,500 companies, they found that all Johns and all David CEOs outnumbered all women. So just CEOs with the name John, just CEOs with the name David outnumbered all women CEOs of these top 1,500 companies. We also see a couple of other names there that are quite up there: Robert, James, Michael, William. And what's interesting here is not just that these male-sounding names outnumber all women CEOs. It's also a compounding effect of Anglo-Saxon names. And so we're not seeing a lot of cultural diversity in the types of names that are at the top of this list either. So this is where we start seeing intersecting identities have a big impact on how people experience the world, but also ultimately how they move through organizations. And this could be for a variety of reasons, whether it's bias and then the resulting discrimination that could come from how people's names looked, or how they are, what the potential that people see with them was they move through organizations. But it also could be things that are baked into systems, which we'll talk about in a bit as well. This was not the only study done around things like this. In Toronto, it found that racialized people made up more than half of Toronto's population at the time of this study in 2020, but only 4.3% of corporate boards and less than 10% of senior leadership. And so when you think about culture, ethnic background, that many of you pointed out in the Menti as well, we're seeing a discrepancy between who's actually in the population and how people move through and access top roles within an organization. Another study that was done on the West Coast of Canada found that women in senior executive management roles was only 20%. They also found across visible minorities, so this was anyone who would identify as a Black person or a person of color. They did an Indigenous perspective study separately. Only 8% of people on board seats would have been categorized as a visible minority or someone who's racialized. And again, only 9% of senior executive management roles were held by this category as well. When we know that the percentage of people across BC is much more closely aligned to what we're seeing in Toronto as well. They also found that only 10% of top 50 companies had Indigenous leadership within their ranks. And Indigenous folks across Canada are one of the fastest growing populations in Canada. So we want to see that really match the population of companies across Canada. So we can see that there's still a gap. There's still ways to go to correct some of the inequities that we're seeing across different demographics of people. Certainly we see here the example of gender, the example of race, ethnicity, but there's many different places where we could see this discrepancy as well. The challenge here is that when we think about what is creating that barrier, that bias is a huge factor. Bias can be anything, any type of prejudice against one group compared to another, usually not based on facts and considered to be unfair. And there's a couple ways that bias can play a role, either implicit bias, so these are the unconscious negative stereotypes that we may hold about different groups of people, but it also could be explicit, so attitudes and beliefs on a conscious level. Regardless of whether it is unconscious, so things that we're not realizing that we're holding in our subconscious, but we're acting on those, or explicit bias, when we act on that type of bias, whether it when it influences our decisions, our behaviors, how we interact, what we see when it comes to fair policies or practices, or how we make decisions about policy that could impact large groups of people, when that bias influences that, that's when it becomes discrimination. So this is acting based on bias, regardless if it's unconscious bias or explicit bias. It is the manifestation of the uneven distribution of power and opportunity between social groups. So we could see this in a few different ways, whether it's interpersonal discrimination. So that might be how I treat an individual person coming from a different background than I am, based on the beliefs that I have formed about that group of people. Again, whether it's unconscious or at an explicit level, if I'm acting and engaging with someone based on those beliefs, that's where discrimination could have a big impact on that interaction. Internalized discrimination is within individuals. And so this really is thinking about how I may measure myself against what I'm seeing in the world. In the Mentimeter, I think it was one of the examples was hairstyles that was shown up there. And that's a very personal example for me. For many Black women and many people with curly hair, actually, curly hair has deemed to be unprofessional in many settings, or we might get that message based on what we see in media or what we see in organizations or representations of what professionalism looks like. So if I internalize that message, I may decide to wear my hair in a particular hairstyle to feel like I fit into what is deemed to be a standard or deemed to be the norm. And so I may actually discriminate against the things that are just natural to me because of the messages that I'm seeing, that maybe how I look is not okay. I might also take myself out of runnings for particular roles because I don't see myself represented within that organization or within different levels of that organization. So I could internalize those messages and then temper my own actions because of that. When we come out of more of that personal level of experience, we're looking at systems and structures. So systemic discrimination are practices that produce inequitable social outcomes. This might look like having a singular online forum for everyone to share either a complaint or to get in touch with an organization. So if we only have one way of doing that, that's an online form, it means that anyone who does not have the familiarity with technology or perhaps doesn't have access to reliable internet, is not close to resources such as community centers or library, if they don't have something like that at home to send in that complaint or get in touch with my organization, I'm creating a barrier to those individuals. And so I'm baking that into my system and not being fully aware of the types of barriers that I'm creating. I may not hear from a whole swath of people because of that barrier I've created around technology or access to technology. When we think about structural discrimination, it's the compounding effect of multiple barriers that people experience across social factors. So just like you shared all those different ways in which people may experience marginalization or privilege within communities, within our country, within systems or even organizations, those compounding effects could have multiple barriers for folks, and that really becomes structural discrimination that's baked into how people operate or engage with the world. When we think about how these two things connect, bias and discrimination, racism, ableism, sexism, homophobia, and all the other isms that occur around us happen at all these levels, whether it's internalized, interpersonal, systemic, or structural. When we start with that personal work of really countering our own personal bias, that could have a compounding positive effect on how we evaluate our interactions with people, how we evaluate our own thinking about ourselves, but also how we then interact with the systems around us, make better decisions around how we create or provide greater access, make better decisions about the policies within our workplaces that could reduce some of those structural barriers that people may face when they're not being considered in operations. So I want to give you a chance now to think about how this shows up within your industry. So where do you see the potential for bias, whether it's unconscious or otherwise, to impact individual experiences, business decisions, and the makeup of systems within your industry? So I'm going to stop sharing here and again, bring us back to Mentimeter so that you can enter in your thoughts there. And let me share that screen so we can see what's coming up for folks. Okay, so the question here is, where do you see the potential for bias to impact individual experiences, business decisions, and the makeup of systems within your industry? It could be around promotions, or how people are promoted, or how people are evaluated. It might be in the types of tools that you use, or how you get feedback on those types of tools that you use. I'm seeing gender in here, absolutely. You know, as we saw from some of that research, gender could have a big impact on who is just leading organizations. But it's all the steps that get us there, right? From, you know, thinking about school and how we introduce certain types of industries or types of work to people. Are we making assumptions even at the high school level as to what genders might be interested in certain types of work? Are we encouraging people to go into work that may not be traditionally assigned or traditionally thought of to be part of what someone from their gender might naturally gravitate towards? And then when we get into school, are we making sure that there's internships and opportunities across different genders for people to participate, encouraging participation across different industries as well? Are there opportunities for mentorship and sponsorship across gender to ensure there's equitable access to opportunity when perhaps there hasn't traditionally been equal access to opportunity based on gender? So it's a great one to put in there. And then that, you know, continues to escalate as we think about promotions, opportunity for growth, sponsorship within organizations, and getting into those top positions within organizations. I'm seeing religious holidays not observed other than Christian holidays. So a big one, especially when we think about Canadian holidays, where many Judeo-Christian holidays are set on calendars, but for people practicing different religions or non-religious as well, often those options for changing how you celebrate your time is not always there in all organizations. When someone does not look like what you think someone in the role should look like, absolutely. You know, we may think about, especially leadership is notorious for having certain perceptions of what a leader may look like. You know, depending on our industry, we may have an image of what a leader in this particular industry looks like, or even how they act like. You know, especially in Western cultures, we may think that someone who's very outgoing, more extroverted might match that leader profile, when we have really great examples of leaders showing up in very different ways. And so the challenge there is to start pulling on those out of the box ways of showing up in a particular role. And so if we make that more of our norm, we're much more likely to mitigate against you know, that thinking of what someone should look like in a particular role. Educational opportunities absolutely could have an impact on the experiences that people have, and then ultimately the types of roles they can get into. If we come from socioeconomic wealth or access, we may have more accessibility to internships that are unpaid, or be able to take advantage of those because we may not have to worry about certain aspects when it comes to monetary need, whereas not everyone has access to those same opportunities. Lack of a local language, yes, absolutely. So as someone is learning a local language, perhaps they actually have 5 different languages that they speak, but are we acknowledging the value that comes in that if perhaps the local language is not as strong as these other ones that could be just as beneficial? Educational background, so I'm seeing that in there again. PPE or equipment design for one body type. Yes, such a great example there. There could be a bias around how people should look. And so that can be baked into how we create materials, PPE, or equipment, or design masks or clothing that is needed to do the work that's necessary. And if someone doesn't fit that mold, think about one, either extra costs that someone has to put out to get something that's customized, or even just the feeling of not being seen as part of the industry if their needs are not being met. Access to technology is a big one. Literacy when it comes to safety and health information. Yes. What often comes up here as well is even access to safety and health information in different languages as people from around the world participate in the industries that we're in as well. Someone's name not matching what you think they look like. Yes, my husband has a last name that could be interpreted as Italian, but he's very much clearly not Italian. And he has had that experience where people make an assumption about what should be walking into the room, and then have very visibly shocked faces when that's not what they see. And so, you could have a superficial experience like that, but you could also have a very meaningful impact on the expectations you have on someone, whether they get promoted or not, or put up into more visible opportunities if they don't match what our profile is in our head of someone who looks a certain way or has a particular name or should have access to a particular opportunity. Smaller stature where people don't think you're strong enough or think you are younger, therefore not a fit for the job. Yes, age, physical stature can have a huge impact on what people perceive of your capabilities, of your experience, and how people then put you into opportunities to demonstrate those capabilities or experience as well. So some really great additions here. I'm going to allow you to continue entering your thoughts if you have any other examples that are coming up. But I want to now move our discussion into understanding diversity and inclusion. So let me get my screen shared again for this one. And so we've been able to talk a little bit now about social equity, around privilege, and how that experience has an impact on people, but also specifically how that leads to bias and then discrimination in how we make decisions, how we interact with others, our expectations or perceptions of others. And this is really a result of diversity, right? There's a diverse group of people that are around us. And you've already started touching on the different ways that we are different from each other. So this could be the range of human differences such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, all the different things that you laid out in our first mentee as well. And so I just want to point out 3 ways of looking at diversity. The first is through inherent diversity. So these are the things that we may be born into or born with. So this could be our gender, the age that we're at currently, our race, disability for some folks, sexual orientation for some folks as well, or socioeconomic background that we're born into. But then that's very different from the things that we may acquire along the way. So what we might acquire along the way could be the experience or function or role that we hold, our education, cultural things that we pick up in the spaces that we live in, or the communities that we grow up in, language or languages that we speak. All of these things can be acquired along the way, and there could be many more that you could add on to the list. The key here is to think about how we really bring both of these things together, because when we have both of these things together, we have thought diversity. We have people that are going to see the world differently, experience the world differently, and challenge each other to do things differently. I'll talk about some of the benefits of this a little bit later, but what we're really aiming for is that thought diversity at all levels of an organization. The challenge is that diversity creates different ways of thinking. And so that can create a challenge around inclusion within organizations. And so that's what I want to talk about now, is how do we evaluate an inclusive culture? How do we really benefit from the diversity that's present within organizations? And there's a few different ways that we could define a culture that is inclusive. The first is through a lens of leadership commitment. Leaders prioritize resources to make EDI strategically significant as an organization, either through plans, through conversations, a willingness to engage in those conversations, or targets to be able to measure against and make sure that we're continuously moving the dial in creating an inclusive culture. Another aspect of inclusive culture is fairness. Are decisions checked for bias? Are they transparent and designed to achieve equitable outcomes? Thirdly, is support visible and experienced within an organization? Are people supported in a culture of growth and flexibility where there is trust, accommodation, and collaboration? Fourth, voice. Do people feel like they have a voice? Do they feel like they can speak up and empowered to share their ideas? And when they do speak up, will their ideas have an impact on the work around them? Will it actually be considered? And then lastly, belonging is a huge part of inclusive culture. Do people feel respected, valued, and that they're able to express themselves authentically? If we're coming to work and having to spend a lot of energy hiding aspects of who we are that are important to us, we're spending a lot more time doing that than on just engaging in our work and being able to bring those different ideas and perspectives to challenge the status quo, to be able to do things differently and actually innovate within our workplaces. So when we have these 5 pillars, as you could say, when it comes to inclusive culture, one of the things that's important to support this is how we lead when it comes to inclusion. So are we doing this through curiosity, appreciating differences? Are we doing this through courage by accepting the mistakes that we may make and not being afraid to lean into those courageous conversations? And are we open to feedback through humility by admitting when we've done something wrong? And then finally, personally, at a personal level, can we show up with commitment? So with this one, I want to give you a moment to really think about this for yourselves. How would you rate your culture in the following areas, those 5 pillars? And where are your greatest opportunities for leaning into leading inclusive culture? So once again, we're going to go back to the Mentimeter. I'm going to share that screen with you and give you a chance to do this first rating of leadership commitment, fair access to opportunity, culture that is accommodating and supportive, and are people's voices being heard? And then finally, do people feel like they belong? So where would you rate your culture between 1, just starting out on these things, or 10, fully there on these things? I'll give you a moment to enter in your thoughts there. I'll get a couple of you entering in. Great. And this might be different for everyone, right? So think about even in just your organization, if you had all the people entering in these, it might show up very differently depending on where you're located in the organization or the type of role you have or what level of leadership that you may have as well. And so we're already seeing a range of scores here coming from many different people in different organizations, but also start reflecting on what that might show up for yourself. Okay. So you can always come back to this one. I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on this next one as well, for those of you already in the Mentimeter. Where are your greatest opportunities for leaning into leading inclusive culture? Is that through demonstrating curiosity, perhaps asking better questions? Is it through demonstrating humility, perhaps recognizing where we don't have all the answers? Or is it through demonstrating courage, being able to speak up in those moments of challenge and really lean into courageous conversations? Or is it by commitment, being able to bring in some opportunities for measurement within your organization, seeing how people really experience inclusion, equity, and how you might move that dial by 1 for everyone? Okay, so seeing a lot of folks seeing that demonstrating courage is right up there. And then right after that is curiosity. Certainly some 2 challenging ones, right? It's not always easy to engage in those challenging conversations, but very necessary. Okay, so I'll let you continue adding in your thoughts there and take us to a bit of a closeout for our time together. So really leaning into allyship and the case for change. So when we think about allyship, it really is thinking about the benefits of how to create an inclusive environment, or the benefits of creating inclusion and leading inclusion in organizations. And we see this in a number of ways. We know that equity requires social change. Diversity can take time when we make those changes, but inclusion can start right away with our own individual actions. And we see that through innovation in organizations. When you have diversity, you're a much more better innovative organization. Diversity also makes us smarter. It challenges us to do things differently, to try new ways of doing things, to listen to different ideas. This encourages much more collaboration with the organizations, and we see those benefits when we have people who know how to collaborate, who know how to engage in challenging conversations. And some of those benefits come down to just simply feeling better, better well-being in organizations where diversity and inclusion is present. So when it comes to allyship, I encourage you to think about this. The more privilege you have, the more opportunity you have. And the more opportunity you have, the more responsibility you have. And so this is our responsibility. Now that we can have this conversation, you have the privilege of sitting in a Zoom room with other folks having the same conversation, to think about how you may want to show up as an ally by doing the work of allyship. And a framework we like to offer for people to think about is acknowledging, learning, and acting. You can acknowledge that bias and the inequality it creates exists by staying curious when faced with challenges that are influenced by bias. You can continue to learn by being humble. So you can continuously learn about the experiences of others and your own role in managing the impact of bias. And you can act by making a decision to act with courage when we see that bias is playing an influential role in actions, behaviors, beliefs, or decisions. So we can do that by asking ourselves a few questions. When it comes to acknowledging, are we communicating our commitment to removing barriers and are open to conversations about EDI? Do leaders acknowledge their own biases? Are we learning by taking advantage of opportunities like this and others to learn more about EDI and other cultures? Are there channels for people that are impacted by our work to share their feedback? And then finally, when it comes to acting, are we examining our policies, practices to mitigate bias and increase diversity and inclusion? Are we intentional in ensuring fair opportunities regardless of people's race, gender, and other diversity dimensions that you've all shared in the Mentee? When we do these things, we experience much more inclusive access, inclusive culture, and then inclusive services, where we can design and provide inclusive products and services that meet the needs of our diverse communities. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I know that we may have some questions coming up in the next few minutes. I'll leave you with just one last Mentimeter for you to think about. And my question to you in this last Mentimeter is really thinking about how might you apply the allyship framework, acknowledge, learn, and act to enhance inclusive access, culture, or services. So again, you can access that through the Mentimeter. I'll leave that up so you can put in your thoughts as we close out our time together. And thanks, everyone, and looking forward to if there's any questions that come up. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. And let me just see if there's anything coming up in the Mentee. So I'm seeing on here, so, already thinking about how you might show up personally. So being aware of biases and asking questions, acknowledging, so focusing on that first part of really acknowledging where perhaps our own biases are, and acknowledging the differences that people may experience within the world. I would focus on learning to appreciate others. Yeah, a really great one. And sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing that we do have opportunity to learn, opportunity to know more. We don't know everything. So that's a really great place to be. Wonderful. I'll let you continue answering in your thoughts there and see if there's any questions that come up. Okay.
See a question coming in here now. So
I think one might be coming in. Okay, no, not on here, but just a few other pieces are coming into the Mentimeter around speaking up. So certainly a couple of folks are saying speaking up more is going to be a key one, and being curious. Okay, in the chat here, I'm saying it can be uncomfortable to ask about someone's culture, background, etc. How do you handle those questions and open the door? Yeah. So I think one of the keys is to really understand why we might be asking those questions, right? If we see that in our company or in our organization or perhaps in our team environment, we haven't accommodated for the differences in cultures that might be present, then asking a question to understand better how someone is impacted by the environment that we are part of or we've created is really great. The challenge, though, is that we're asking questions just for our own curiosity. So I get lots of questions about where I'm from. I think even though I'm born here in Canada, because of how I look, I've gotten those questions my whole life. And they kind of fall into two camps. Either one, because someone's genuinely curious, they really have, curiosity about the differences that are around us in our world. We're very multicultural in the place where I live. And so, these questions could often come up, just getting to know people. The other camp, though, could be almost a feeling of entitlement to know where someone's from, or assuming that someone is not part of a particular culture or part of being the makeup of Canada. And so that's really where there could be that challenge in someone receiving a question like that. So when I said, to share why or to understand why you're asking that question, that's really important. And so one thing that you can do is to preface questions with, I want to ask this because I'm recognizing that we may not be accounting for all of the different ways that people want to celebrate holidays within our team. And so I'm asking people, what are some of the important cultural practices that are part of your family or part of what you want to celebrate, so we can make sure to incorporate these differences into the decisions we make around holidays. So if I'm receiving that question, I know exactly why you're asking it. I know exactly the type of information that I can share back with you that's going to be helpful, and that I know that it's coming from a place of wanting to create a more inclusive environment. If I'm not given that information as to why, then I might feel that you're simply asking me because I look different or because I might be doing something different. And so that's where someone could feel othered and not part of a community when being asked a question like that. So thanks, Andrew, for that question. It's a really good one. It is not always comfortable. So the key there is understanding why we're asking that question and prefacing that to the person that we're asking that so they understand where we're coming from in that question. Yeah. Great. Okay, we have just a few more moments, it looks like, and yep, still in the Mentimeter, speaking up more. That curiosity is being hailed as some key things there. Okay. Questions come in. Welcome to put them in the Q&A. But yeah, everyone.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah, not seeing too many more questions, but yeah, this was a great presentation, Shalyma. Really, really appreciate that, and great message, and very, very informative about equity, inclusion, and diversity. I had a lot of great notes that I took, and I think probably everyone here will be able to take and apply this to our everyday work and life. This was really good. Thank you so much for joining us today for that, and you'll be back as well for the panel at 2 p.m. I believe, right? So yeah, that's great. So we'll take if there's no more questions, we'll take a quick break here, and we'll rejoin at 10 o'clock Central Time. That's about 8 minutes from now. So again, thank you, Shalyma, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Up next, we have Wendy Bennett to present on psychologically safe workplaces. Wendy is the Executive Director of AgSafe in British Columbia and has been a health and safety professional since 1995. As an advocate for positive and safe work environments, Wendy is a member of various provincial, national, and international safety boards and committees. Starting with a BA honors in psychology and sociology, Wendy went on to earn her EMBA, Health and Safety Leadership, and is a certified registered safety professional. She has an advanced certificate in psychological health and safety in the workplace. Joining AgSafe as the Director of Programs in 2013, Wendy became the Executive Director in 2014, having worked for more than 10 years as a health and safety manager with one of British Columbia's largest school districts. Wendy brings her knowledge and experience to agriculture. AgSafe benefits from Wendy's leadership skills and her experience designing and delivering training and education resources. Her goal is to ensure everyone in agriculture has the resources they need to create safe and healthy working environments. Wendy also uses her knowledge and experience in her role as a course tutor with the BCIT Occupational Health and Safety Certificate Program, a professor with UFRED, and as a mentor to those building a career in occupational health and safety. Just a reminder that your microphones and cameras are disabled, and if you do have questions, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. CASA staff will monitor these questions and share these during the Q&A period or during the panel at 2 p.m. this afternoon. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Wendy to get things started. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a long introduction, but thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a lot of information to cover, and it's there's a lot of words, which I don't typically like to do, but I think it's important that we talk about this stuff very clearly. So bear with me while I make this. Hang on, first I have to do from begin. Show. Hang on, uno segundo. Share screen. There we go. Share. I need to open this. Okay, are we good? Can somebody just confirm that I got this right?
Yeah, we can see you, Wendy.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about psychological safety in the workplace, and I want to be really clear right off the bat that this is not a mental health session. This is about psychological safety. It's a different game, but we will get into that. And it certainly is a very key component of health and safety programs that is happening now. I know particularly here in British Columbia, they are beginning to write the legislation that will require employers to provide a psychologically healthy and safe workplace for their workers. What this is going to look like, your guess is as good as mine. But what I'm hoping is that they're going to base all of this on the CSA standard that was generated about 10 years ago that is currently undergoing a review. And I'm anticipating that there will be a few changes that come with that. But that's ideally or essentially what we are going to go through today. So according to the CSA standard, psychological safety is the absence of harm and or threat of harm to the mental well-being that a worker might experience. Improving the psychological safety of a work setting involves taking precautions to avert injury or danger to workers' psychological health. So this is different from from mental health. Psychological health comprises our ability to think, feel, and behave in a manner that enables us to perform effectively in our work environments, our personal lives, and in society at large. Psychological health problems occur on a spectrum, from common psychological difficulties such as fatigue to more severe psychological disorders. But psychological safety is different. It deals with the risk of injury to psychological well-being. So improving psychological safety in a work setting involves taking precautions to avert injury or danger to employee psychological health that is within the influence and the responsibility of an employer. While psychological health and safety are deserving of equal protection, it's important to note from a strategic perspective, taking action to ensure safety, we are safety people, that should be done before the promotion of health. A psychologically healthy and safe workplace is one that promotes employees' psychological well-being and actively works to prevent harm to employee psychological health due to negligent, reckless, or intentional acts. So I'm sure you can think of bullying as an example as an intentional act, and it's the employer's obligation to prevent that from happening. So when you look at the CSA standard, they've developed 13 psychosocial factors. This was adapted from a program called Guarding Minds at Work, which was developed through the Mental Health Commission of Canada and a lot of very prestigious researchers. The 13th factor was added for the purposes of this standard, which is the protection of physical safety, because the CSA is looking at a health and safety management system for psychological safety in the workplace. The 13 workplace factors are organizational or systemic in nature, and therefore they are within the influence of the workplace. So we're going to go into each one of them and how those impact a workplace and what a good workplace looks like. Addressing them effectively has the potential to positively impact worker mental health, psychological safety, and participation. Excuse me. And this in turn can improve productivity and bottom line results. So it's a win-win situation. So the first psychosocial factor that we look at is organizational culture, a mix of norms, values, beliefs, and expectations that group members hold in common and that they use as behavioral and problem-solving cues. So think about the organizational culture within your own operation. And when somebody new comes in, how do they learn about what that organizational culture is? It can enhance the psychological safety and health of the workplace and the workforce when it's characterized by trust, honesty, respect, civility, and fairness, or when it values, for example, psychological and social support, recognition, and reward. An organization that has a good organizational culture can state that all people in the workplace are held accountable for their actions, that people at work show sincere respect for others' ideas, their values, and their beliefs. Difficult situations at work are addressed effectively. Workers feel that they're part of a community, and workers in management trust one another. Next, we're looking at psychological and social support. This comprises all supportive interactions available at work, either with coworkers or supervisors. It's referring to the degree of social and emotional integration and trust among coworkers and supervisors. Refers also to the level of help and assistance provided by others when one is performing tasks. But equally important are the workers' perceptions and awareness of organizational support. When workers perceive organizational support, it means they believe their organization values their contributions, is committed to ensuring their psychological well-being, and provides meaningful support if this well-being is compromised. So the ability to reach out. An organization with good psychological and social support could state that the organization offers services or benefits that address workers' psychological and mental health, that workers feel part of a community and that the people they're working with are helpful in fulfilling the job requirements, that the organization has a process in place to intervene if an employee looks distressed while at work. Workers feel supported by the organization when they're dealing with personal or family issues. The organization supports workers who are returning to work after time off due to a mental health condition. And people in the organization have a good understanding of the importance of worker mental health. Excuse me one second. Discussing clear leadership and expectations in an environment which leadership is effective and provides sufficient support that helps workers know what they need to do, explain how their work contributes to the organization, and discusses the nature and expected outcomes of impending changes. So there are many types of leadership, each of which impacts psychological safety and health in different ways. The most widely accepted categorizations of leadership are instrumental, transactional, and transformational. Of these, transformational leadership is considered the most powerful. Instrumental leadership focuses primarily on producing outcomes with little attention paid to the big picture, the social dynamics within the organization, and unfortunately, the individual workers. I'm sure we all know somebody like that. Transformational leaders are seen as change agents who motivate their followers to do more than what's expected. They're concerned with long-term objectives and transmit a sense of mission, vision, and purpose. They have charisma, give individual consideration to their workers, stimulate intellectual capabilities in others, and inspire workers. So hopefully you know leaders like that. An organization with clear leadership and explicit expectations would be able to state that in their jobs, workers know what they're expected to do, that leadership in the workplace is effective, that workers are informed about important changes at work in a timely manner, that supervisors provide helpful feedback to workers on their expected and actual performance, and the organization provides effective, clear communication. Looking at civility and respect is present in a work environment where workers are respectful and considerate in their interactions with one another, as well as with customers, clients, and the public. Civility and respect are based on showing esteem, care, and consideration for others and acknowledging dignity. An organization with good civility and respect will be able to state that people treat each other with respect and consideration in the workplace. The organization effectively handles conflicts between stakeholders. Workers from all backgrounds are treated fairly, and the organization has effective ways of addressing inappropriate behavior. Psychological demands, and this is a big one, of any given job need to be documented and assessed in conjunction with the physical demands of the job. Psychological demands allow organizations to determine whether any activity of the job might be a hazard to the worker's health and well-being. When hazards are identified, organizations consider ways of minimizing risks associated with job hazards through work redesign, the analysis of work systems, risk assessments, things like that. The assessment of psychological demands should include the assessment of time stressors, so including time constraints, quotas, deadlines, machine pacing, things like that, breaks and rest periods, incentive systems, are there production bonuses, piecework, job monotony, and the repetitive nature of some work and hours of work. If you think about overtime requirements, 12-hour shifts and shift work and things like that. An organization with a good psychological demands, this is a lot of words, can state that the organization considers existing work systems and allows for work redesign. They assess worker demand and job control, such as physical and psychological job demands. They assess the level of job control and autonomy afforded to its workers. They monitor the management system to address behaviors that impact workers and the workplace. The organization values worker input, particularly during periods of change and the execution of work. They monitor the level of emphasis on production issues. The organization reviews its management accountability system that deals with performance issues and how workers can report errors. And the organization emphasizes recruitment, training, and promotion practices that aim for the highest level of interpersonal competencies at work. How many organizations actually have interpersonal skills as a key element in making its hiring decisions? When we look at growth and development, this is present in a work environment where workers receive encouragement and support in the development of their interpersonal, emotional, and job skills. These workplaces provide a range of internal and external opportunities for workers to build their repertoire of competencies, which will not only help with their current jobs, but can help prepare them for future possibilities. An organization that's got good growth and development can state that workers receive feedback at work that helps them grow in development. So it's positive, not just always negative. Supervisors are open to worker ideas for new opportunities and challenges. Workers have opportunities to advance within the organization. The organization values workers' ongoing growth and development, and workers have the opportunity to develop their people skills at work, the soft skills that are so important in getting through life these days. Recognition and reward, this is on the list as well. In a work environment where there's appropriate acknowledgement and appreciation of workers' efforts in a fair and timely manner, not just when they have that annual review. This includes appropriate and regular acknowledgements such as worker or team celebrations, recognition of good performance or years served, milestones reached, things of that nature. An organization with a good recognition and reward program can state that as immediate supervision demonstrates appreciation of workers' contributions. Workers are paid fairly for the work they do. The organization appreciates efforts made by workers celebrates shared accomplishments, and values workers' commitment and passion for their work. Involvement and influence, a work environment where workers are included in discussions about how their work is done and how important decisions are made. Opportunities for involvement can relate to a worker's specific job, the activities of a team or department, or involve the whole organization. Good involvement and influence can state workers are able to talk to their immediate supervisors about how their work is done. They have some control over how they organize their work. Opinions and suggestions are considered with respect to work. Workers are informed of important changes that can impact how their work is done, and the organization encourages input from all workers on important decisions related to their work. When you look at workload management, so these are a lot of factors. So this is 9. I promise we're going to not just read slides. In a work environment where assigned tasks and responsibilities can be accomplished successfully within the time available. This is the risk factor that many working Canadians describe as being the biggest workplace stressor. So having too much to do and not enough time to do it. It's been demonstrated it's not just the amount of work that makes a difference, but also the extent to which workers have the resources, the time, the equipment, the support to do the work well. That's an interruption as far as I'm concerned, that picture. An organization with good workload management can state the amount of work that workers are expected to do is reasonable for their positions. They have the equipment and resources needed to do their job well. Workers can talk to their supervisors about the amount of work they have to do. Workers' work is free from unnecessary interruptions and disruptions. And workers have an appropriate level of control over prioritizing tasks and responsibilities when facing multiple demands. This one in particular, I think if we look back to the days when we were in lockdown and the multiple demands and the requirements that were in place for particularly families, full work expectations for many, and then you have kids at home who are still expected to attend school electronically or digitally, and when they're young in particular, don't have the capacity to teach themselves on Zoom, or their attention span may have been shorter. And the families that managed to accomplish sanity in that time frame, I think is amazing. So I think workload management is a real issue that we have to be respectful of. Engagement. This is present in a work environment where workers enjoy and feel connected to their work and where they feel motivated to do their job well. Worker engagement can be physical, it can be emotional, and it can also be cognitive. Physical engagement based on the amount of exertion a worker puts into his or her job. Physically engaged workers view work as a source of energy. Emotionally engaged workers have a positive job outlook and are passionate about their work. Cognitively engaged workers devote more attention to their work and are absorbed in their job. But whatever the source, engaged workers feel connected to their work because they can relate to and are committed to the overall success and mission of their company. Engagement should be seen as a result of policies, practices, and procedures for the protection of worker psychological health and safety. Engagement is similar, but it's not to be mistaken for job satisfaction, job involvement, organizational commitment, psychological empowerment, and intrinsic motivation. An organization with good engagement would be able to state that workers enjoy their work, workers are willing to give extra effort at work if needed, workers describe work as an important part of who they are, they're committed to the success of the organization, and workers take pride in the work they do. Balance, that all-important factor, is present in a work environment where there is acceptance of the need for a sense of harmony between the demands of personal life, family, and work. This factor reflects the fact that everyone has multiple roles. I go back to the COVID example. Workers, parents, partners, etc. The complexity of roles is enriching and allows fulfillment of individual strengths and responsibilities. But conflicting responsibilities can lead to role conflict or overload. An organization with good balance can state that the organization encourages workers to take their entitled breaks, lunch break, sick time, vacation time, earned days off, parental leave, those kind of things. Workers are able to reasonably meet the demands of personal life and work. The organization promotes life-work harmony. Workers can talk to their supervisors when they're having trouble maintaining harmony between their life and work. And workers have energy left at the end of most work days for their personal life. There's a lot of demands being placed on a workplace. Psychological protection present in a work environment where workers' psychological safety is concerned. Workplace psychological safety is demonstrated when workers feel able to put themselves on the line, ask questions, seek feedback, report mistakes or problems, or propose a new idea without fearing negative consequences to themselves, their job, or their career. A psychologically safe and healthy organization actively promotes emotional well-being among workers while taking all reasonable steps to minimize threats to worker mental health. Thinking about this one, if you're working with a safety committee, for example, and you have somebody who's new and there isn't good psychological protection in a workplace, will they put their hand up when they have a comment or a question, or would they sit idly by hoping that somebody else addresses their concern? An organization with good psychological protection, the organization is committed to minimizing unnecessary stress at work. Immediate supervisors care about workers' emotional well-being. The organization makes efforts to prevent harm to workers from harassment, bullying, discrimination, violence, or stigma. Workers would describe the workplace as being psychologically healthy, and the organization deals effectively with situations that can threaten or harm workers. So those items earlier, harassment, bullying, etc. Lastly, the protection of physical safety is present when a worker's psychological as well as physical safety is protected from hazards and risks related to the worker's physical environment. An organization that protects physical safety can state that the organization cares about how the physical work environment impacts mental health. Workers feel safe, not concerned or anxious about the physical work environment. The way work is scheduled allows for reasonable rest periods. All health and safety concerns are taken seriously. Workers asked to do work that they believe is unsafe have no hesitation in refusing to do it. Workers get sufficient training to perform their work safely, and the organization assesses the psychological demands of the jobs and the job environment to determine if it presents a hazard to workers' health and safety. So those are the 13 psychosocial factors. All of these psychosocial factors are important when creating a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. Any one of these can contribute to the development of stress. So everybody has stress, but when it impacts your function in a negative way, that's when it's unhealthy. So is there a way to build stress tolerance, resilience, and hardiness? Can toxic stress be reduced? Because high stress causes cortisol release, and this hormonal response has a lot of negative health effects associated with it, including narrowing arteries, a change in the artery walls, an increase in platelet stickiness, insulin resistance, muscular tension, and poor sleep quality. And if you recognize when you're experiencing stress, everybody has something different. I mean, I know for me, if I ever go for a massage, up through my neck and shoulders is just tighter than rocks sometimes. And being able to recognize this in yourself before it can become problematic is very important. Pardon me. So generally, we use the word stress when we feel that everything seems to have become too much. When we're overloaded, wonder whether we can really cope with the pressures that are being placed upon us. Some stresses get you going and they're good for you. And without any stress at all, many say that our lives would be boring and probably feel quite pointless. But when the stresses undermine both physical and mental health, then they're bad. And most of us have varying interpretations of what stress is about and what matters. Some of us focus on what happens to us, like breaking a bone or getting a promotion. So I just have to stop on there right now because I got a text message from my son who is in Los Angeles right now. The text message said, How do I know if I broke my femur? Next message, like not snapped in half, but from impact. So no stress there. He's in LA. That's a text message. He didn't break his femur. It's a very difficult bone to break, but thank you very much for that. So sorry, other things that can happen to us, getting a promotion, while others think more about an event itself. So what really matters are our thoughts about the situations in which we find ourselves. So we're continually sizing up situations that confront us in life. We assess each situation, deciding whether it's a threat, how we can deal with it, and what resources we can use. If we conclude that the required resources needed to effectively deal with a situation are beyond what we have available, then we say that situation is stressful. And we react with a classical stress response. But on the other hand, if we decide that our available resources and skills are more than enough to deal with the situation, it's not seen as stressful to us. If an event is perceived as a challenge we can meet, we generally view it as a positive source of stimulation, motivation, or energy. That will be different for every individual. So some of the things that cause stress, if you think about it, selling or buying a home, moving, changing jobs, getting married, getting divorced, having children, some of your daily activities, traffic, morning routine in your house, if you have a partner who travels quite a bit, your personality. Some people are very tied to resiliency and some are able to handle multitasking and multiple pressures, while others have to focus on one thing at a time. Nutrition has an impact on stress. How are you when you're hungry? Do you get hangry? What if you forgot to eat because you were too busy? What about skipping meals and just living on coffee? Looking at your physical environment, being in an inordinate amount of noise or with extreme temperatures. What about the lighting and any distractions that are in place? Do you have a private office, or are you in a cubicle farm, or are you on a beautiful farm out in the gorgeous, well, it's not so gorgeous today. Personal interactions, confidence, social skills, conflict, if you're awkward, not sure what to say to the boss. When an employee arrives at work, they arrive as an entire package. Same with when they leave work. So there's no division between personal and work stress. But what we can do is look at the various organizational factors that are contributing to stress. So role conflict occurs when people are confronted with incompatible role expectations. And conflict can also occur when people disagree about what the expectations are for a particular role, or when someone simply has difficulty satisfying expectations because their duties are unclear. Remember, that was one of the psychosocial factors. If their duties are too difficult or disagreeable. A parent may feel conflicting obligations to employers who demand full devotion to the job, and children who are needed to be cared for when they're sick, or parents who need to be cared for. A lot of us are in that sandwich generation right now. Stress can also have some really positive impacts. It can increase your motivation. It can provide a sense of challenge. Sometimes it can provide some renewed energy. Sometimes stress allows people to be a little more accurate and pay much closer attention to the detail of the job that they're doing. Stress can contribute to excitement. It can increase self-confidence, and it can have contribution to having a sense of purpose and a goal. So the reality, there's less people today to do the same amount of work. I'd like to know where everybody went, but it doesn't matter what industry you're looking at, there's always a help wanted sign up there. That being said, with less people available, the job responsibilities for those of us left behind has increased and accountability has increased. With the restructuring to accommodate all of these things, there still are a lot of fears with regards to job loss. So there's a continuous need for training for everybody. The job market is shrinking. The workforce is aging. People are retiring. There's a lot of challenge sometimes with accommodating for different jobs. The strategies are variable. The options are lacking in many cases. There's buyouts that are happening. Benefits packages are generous because people can be retired early And again, that leads back up to the top with less people to do the work. So workplace stress is on the rise, and stress-related disability is too. If you recall, stress can lead to an increase in a variety of hormones that can lead to a lot of significant heart diseases and things like that. Stress can manifest itself in a lot of physiological ways for different people that can cause individuals to need to take time away from work in order to recover from stress. So how do we look at balance? There was a survey done about 5 years ago of 570 employees and 1,200 leaders that found that successful organizations recognized the link between employee well-being and productivity, and they addressed the stress within the workplace with the hope of improving productivity within the workplace. They found that workplaces that provide options and resources to assist people with balancing personal lives and professional obligations, that helped to reduce stress. It positively impacted their engagement, their loyalty, and their overall happiness at work. So happy workers, healthy workers, increased productivity, happier employers. The balance, it's not meant to be perfect. So whose responsibility actually is it? And some people say it's up to the employer to ensure balance, but really the person, the employee, that individual needs to be in control of their own happiness. They have more choices to make, but they often don't make them because of the fear of change. People need to be seeking out employers who accommodate life balance and not necessarily look to an employer to provide it. So here's a list, but how are we going to help farmers to apply some of these tips to their lives to lead a more balanced life? So prioritizing personal and professional obligations, ensuring important tasks, including the ones that are just for you, are separated from the non-important duties. Scheduling meetings at work, that happens. So can you schedule parts of your personal time? For example, do you decide you want to work out, but you can't fit time to go into the gym into your life? But if you schedule this, you're more likely that that's going to happen. If you schedule date night, if you will, it's more likely that you're not going to schedule something else around it and that something is going to happen. So allowing even 10 to 15 minutes each day written into a schedule to deal with small personal tasks can be very helpful. Using different tools to help organize and maintain productivity, conferences, calendars, check-in meetings, things like that. Those can all, there's some big calendars. I remember when I had 3 children in sports, the calendar was huge to try to accommodate and ensure that we had a space for everybody and everybody knew what they were doing. And if it wasn't on the calendar, chances are it didn't happen. Then decluttering. Visual clutter can zap productivity. So decluttering your workspace, decluttering some of your home space, and allowing the space around you to give you an opportunity for focus. And then do you have the ability to delegate? You don't have to do everything yourself. You also need to learn how to say no in many cases. You know, if your boss comes to you and says, I need you to do A, B, C, do you have the capacity to say, yes, I'll take that on, but the other A, B, C, then, you know, do I take that off the list? Being able and confident to be able to have that conversation. So in looking at your own personal decisions, how healthy, how focused are your decisions? Do you take time to build healthy habits? Do you secure leisure time? Do you evaluate and reflect and make changes as necessary? So for those of you who live in a city area, can you change your commute? Can you adjust and avoid rush hour traffic in the morning and in the afternoon? Can you optimize your breaks? Use the personal time that you have to chat with a friend or go out for a walk or do some exercise. I know there's an individual in my office who may be on this who does laps of the building, takes the stairs and does a lap of each floor on a break time. Planning can really, really help if you start off each week to prioritize your tasks and schedule both your personal and professional commitments. And then with regards to, you know, looking at your research, are there opportunities for flexible work arrangements? Vacation time, when are you going to take it? Is there an area of the world or the planet or the country or whatever that has a lower cost of living that would give you less stress and would allow for a greater life balance? I live in the lower mainland of British Columbia. So if you want to be able to afford to work here or to live here, you have to win the lottery. I don't know how we're all managing these days, but looking at different, do you have supportive relationships? Is there a network of support in all parts of your life? And are you in the right job? Is there role conflict? How's the workload? What's the pace? Do you have enough education, training? What can you do about that if you're answering no to any of these different questions? Lastly, looking at this from a farm perspective, how do we, and this is where I'm going to stop the slide presentation and hope for conversation, psychological safety when you live and work on a farm, if we look at the 13 factors, how can we support farmers who aren't in balance? How do we recognize the different challenges? And how do we support them with empathy, given that we're not part of this? All right, so what I would like to do is stop sharing my screen. Bruce, am I able to open this up to conversation now?
Yep, we should be able to get some questions coming in here now. So yep, just one question on the chat here. How can an employer support a staff member whose stress outside of work is impacting their work? Or how much or how far should an employer go?
Ouch. You know, how far should an employer go? I think, and that's a really tough one. And a lot of that is, it's all related to the conversation, or sorry, to the relationship that this individual has with the employer. Is this something that it's going to be unique and individual, but if it is impacting work, then it's necessary to have a conversation with the worker to determine how they can reduce their stress, offering support through, if there's an employee assistance program, perhaps, offering to assist them in receiving some kind of counseling to manage their stress, recommending that they perhaps check in with their doctor and go see a medical professional and determine if there's ways that they can address the stress levels in their life. Because if it's impacting work, they still have a job to do and there are expectations. Finding that balance, if they cannot address stress at home and it's impacting work, perhaps they need to take a leave of absence. There's still a job to do, but being supportive and encouraging them to take care of themselves, I think, is crucial. And knowing that it's not that you must be like this or, deal with your stress or don't, whatever. But we still have to recognize that as an employer, that person still has a job to do, and there are expectations for them to attend work and do their job. But being supportive and helping them to get the resources to address the stress, I think, is the employer responsibility. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's a tough one.
Great. Yeah, I'm seeing a few more coming in here. How do you share with employees and encourage them to communicate in a safe space?
You have to establish the safe space first. So I think, I personally, I have a very unique work environment in that I have my work family, and I know that the majority of my team also agree that it's a work family, and we have a very safe space. We're also a small group. So I think creating that safe space is crucial, and it's going to take the work of many to be able to create that safe space. An individual may feel comfortable having a conversation with one person, and that's okay. And ensuring that they realize that they can trust that individual and that that's a sacred conversation if there's a circle of trust. I think having that opportunity again to reflect on resources that are available to them and encouraging them to reach out for additional help and assisting them to reach out for additional help when it's necessary, that helps to create the safe space that you're referring to, by knowing that you're not taking it all on yourself, but giving them the, thank you for coming to me with a struggle, and here's how we can support you. You can, access this person or that person, those kind of things.
Great. What about for farmers, like say during the busy season? What do you think they should do just to to take that break? There's often the mentality of trying to just get things done, and how do you take a break from that stress during that time?
Yeah, the get her done. So one of the things, so there's a lot of supports available for mental health for farmers throughout the country, and they vary in each province. But one of the things that is so crucial is any farmers that are going to talk to a counselor, as an example, are agriculturally aware of what's going on, and it's not the, well, why don't you go for a walk outside, or why don't you just take a week of vacation? So in addressing farmers who have the really, really busy season, and I mean, recently a lot of harvest for dairy farmers here specifically, and watching some of the videos of going out at 4 o'clock in the morning and not coming in until 8 o'clock at night, but encouraging farmers to take just 2 minutes, get out of the cab at the end of the row or whatever, when you turn or something like that, just get out of the cab for 2 minutes and just breathe. It doesn't have to be a big, long, full break. You're still going to get everything done. We're not asking you to take, half an hour or an hour or even any extensive length of time, but get out of the cab, take a breath, take in your surroundings. And I think that perhaps some farmers, because it's so much work and they're around it all the time, maybe they stop appreciating the incredible beauty of the area that they are located in, and being able to just take some deep breaths and take it all in, and reminding themselves that you got this, or phone a friend and I got this, but something that just is a quick opportunity to just take a breath. Like, I'm hoping that can be helpful. I know that's one of the things that in working with the Dairy Association this summer, we were really trying to promote, because we know that it's got to be done and nobody else is going to do it. So we've got to work right through and push it through. And so many farmers that I've met, they go out with a list in the morning that's got 20 things on it, and they accomplish whatever they can on that list, and they come back and the list now has 25. So how do they get that done, and how do they not become overwhelmed? That's a mental health conversation. This is a psychological safety conversation.
Yeah. Great points there. And just a few other questions rolling in here. Again, if anyone has other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. How do you begin to implement a psychologically safe workplace? Say, like, if your workplace isn't naturally thinking about it already, what steps should someone take?
So I would encourage, and I will put this in the chat, through Guarding Minds at Work, they have a ton of free resources, and it can start with different surveys. So first, they evaluate the readiness for an organization to be able to look at a psychological safety program. And it takes you through, there's a survey that employees can do, supervisors can do, and employers can do. They're all different. And then it comes up with the results. And then it encourages different ways to start. And you can address one of the 13 psychosocial factors, or you can address a group of them. But based on the surveys, it will identify where the organization's strengths lie from the various different perspectives, and which areas they might need to work on a little bit. So going through those surveys, I found absolutely fascinating, but I kind of geek out over this kind of stuff. But it gives an opportunity to guide you in and guide an organization in how they can start to implement. And it can be something that happens really quickly. It can take a really long time, but it's very important that it's that there's engagement from all levels. It has to be employees and managers and supervisors and all the middle people. It can't be driven top down, or it won't work. So I'll put the link in the chat because it's pretty interesting.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I guess not seeing too many other questions here. Maybe just give one more minute. But yeah, thank you, Wendy. That was a great presentation. And yeah, lots to learn and lots to think about there, and you know, psychological safety and demands that it makes on us. I think it's something that that we can all identify with. So yeah, great presentation. Thank you for that. And just seeing here one other question here. Suggestions to support psychological and well-being during and after emergencies or natural disaster, floods, forest fires, hurricanes, etc.
So here's what, and I'm going to speak purely from our experience in BC after the horrific floods. And some of my colleagues have been very supportive throughout the rest of the province with regards to aftermath and experience with the fires, forest fires that have plagued our province many, many, many years. And what we found the most with regards to the floods specifically was bringing groups together. Wasn't necessarily our group. We got to participate, which was absolutely amazing. But there were different farmers who were minimally impacted by the flooding, and they formed groups to help support those who had been significantly impacted by the flooding. And these groups of people, they came together for just for coffee. Actually, a lot of them came together to get resources. There was lots of donations, and there were a lot of different donation centers that opened that were on farms. So on dairy farms in both cases that I'm familiar with. And just the people that came together and were able to have conversations, and just the sense of community that was built from this was absolutely incredible. When they started to do more formal arrangements and have these communities that naturally came together and brought professionals in to just be with them while they were having hot soup, for example, and the professional mental health professionals would just visit each of the different tables. It was never a formal. We have put in formal opportunities in place as well to support the mental health, but a lot of it was just done in a very informal setting where these groups, the communities, came together to support each other. And then we invited some mental health professionals to participate and just to be there. If somebody wanted to have a more personal conversation, a more confidential conversation, that ability or that invitation was there for them. And the ability to do that was present. But largely, it was an incredible amount of support for each other. AgSafe developed a number of documents that can be useful and can be helpful. I know Nova Scotia has some awesome stuff. Through the Canadian Centre for Agriculture Wellness, through Do More Ag, there's so many different groups that have lots of pieces of information to help support farmers. But the biggest one that I learned in all of the situations was that they need each other. And so being able to facilitate that seemed to have the greatest impact.
Yeah, great. And I guess no doubt probably just trying to make that move so quickly after an emergency would be really, really challenging there too. Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So I'm not seeing too many more questions coming in there. So I guess with that, we'll take a break here, and I think we're going to reconvene at 1 p.m. Central Time. So the link that you've got, or that you all have there from this morning, that'll work again this afternoon for those sessions as well. So we'll see you back at 1 p.m. Central Time.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for joining the CASA Virtual Conference 2023. I hope everybody had a great break over the lunch. I was fortunate to take an opportunity to get outside. It's a beautiful day here in Winnipeg and enjoy some fall weather. It's just such a beautiful time of year, and I hope everybody had a chance to take a break. So first off today, I do want to thank our sponsors. So our conference supporters are John Deere Canada and Safe Work Manitoba, and our conference helper is Syngenta. Without sponsorship, we certainly could not put on conferences like this, and we really, truly appreciate the support of our sponsors. Your microphones and cameras have been disabled, and if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and the chat function is also going on. I will be monitoring for questions and share them with our speakers throughout the afternoon. Sorry. And we also have simultaneous interpretation available for the conference today. So if you want interpretation to French, please, in your meeting webinar controls, click interpretation, the little globe system, symbol you'll see at the bottom of the screen, and then select French, and you will be able to access the conference information and our presenters in French. If you do have any questions or want to get any of the conference materials translated, please contact Megan Truxell here at CASA, and her information scrolls during the break, and you can always find her information on our website. So we're going to move into today's conference, and I can see Jordan and Joe are here with us, and they are available. I believe everybody can see them. And so we do have Joe Dickenson and Jordan Miller from the Beef Farmers of Ontario, and their topic today is supporting all members of our community, Beef Farmers Ontario's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they don't know this. They were a big part of kind of forming the theme for today. We started the day off with an introduction to equity, diversity, and inclusion, learning about it, understanding it. Then we had Wendy come in and talk about psychologically safe workplaces. And now we have Jordan and Joe here to talk about what Ontario Beef Farmers has done. And I saw a presentation with Jordan and Joe, I think it was in June, with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And it was such a great presentation that I thought, wow, we need to get these guys to come talk to our membership and people connected to CASA. So thank you for joining us today, Jordan and Joe. Always a little uncomfortable part. We're going to highlight you, tell you all the great things about you guys, and share with our audience. So let's talk about Jordan for a minute. Jordan grew up in an Air Force family and moved around a lot, but he always called Manitoulin Island home, having spent many summers on the island with extended family. He studied athletic therapy at the University of Manitoba and worked as an athletic therapist and part-time instructor in the kinesiology program at the Redeemer University College for 6 years. In 2015, Jordan and his wife, Kate, moved home to the farm where he and his extended family run a large cow-calf farm on Western Manitoulin Island. Jordan farms full-time while Kate works as a physician assistant at the Manitoulin Health Center, and together they are raising their 3 energetic little farm boys to respect food production and our environment. Jordan joined the Beef Farmers of Ontario Board of Directors in February 2018. He's found the role to be fulfilling as he learns more about the industry, enjoys the opportunity to meet beef producers from all over Ontario, and works together with his fellow directors and industry peers to effect positive change in the Ontario beef industry. Also with us today is Joe Dickenson. Joe is a Beef Farmers of Ontario Board of Director and a co-chair of the Beef Farmers of Ontario's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Joe resides in Ontario's Lambton County on a 70-cow birth-to-beef operation he purchased in 2008. Joe graduated from the University of Guelph and has been involved in the beef industry beginning as a 4-H member when he was 13. He also runs a small cash crop and baling operation. Joe is a member of the Lambton County Cattlemen's Association and was previously a director at large with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, president of the Junior Farmers Association of Ontario, and the Ontario-Quebec representative of the Canadian Young Farmers Forum. Currently, Joe also serves as a professor in the new agricultural program at Lambton College and as a lab professor at the University of Guelph Ridgetown campus. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jordan and Joe, and I appreciate you so much for being here today and sharing your experience and in bringing in DEI at the Beef Farmers of Ontario.
Thanks for the invitation, Andrea. We're excited to be here. Just gonna do my best here to share my screen. Everybody see that? Okay, it's coming through. Is that working, Andrea?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So my name's Jordan Miller, and here with my partner in crime, Joe, and we're here to talk about our journey at the Beef Farmers of Ontario with our DEI work, and where we're coming from and where we're hopefully headed to. And if Joe and Andrea, if you could keep an eye on the Q&A stuff, with my shared screen, I can't really see it all that well, but I want to say hi to everybody, Joe.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody. I've got the chat up as well, so I'll be able to keep an eye on things. Thank you for having us today. This has really been quite a journey since we proposed this back in 2000, and it's brought about some really good conversations and some really good questions as well, and we're looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about today, DEI, whether or not it's in our mandate, developing a statement of values, making the public statement. Once it's out there, the reaction to the statement, and then what we learned and where we're headed to next is sort of the general framework of our presentation for this afternoon. Okay. So following the George Floyd incident, which happened a number of years ago, I had a lot of thoughts rolling around in my head as to what the role of the BFO should be or could be as leaders in beef production in Ontario. It felt like, from an agricultural perspective, the comments being made were just non-existent. Nobody was making statements. Nobody was talking about the atrocities which we were witnessing right in front of us on our TVs and our computer screens. And so I kind of felt like, personally, that the Beef Farmers of Ontario has an opportunity to make a difference in this field, but I didn't know where to start or how to go about initiating the process. And that's when I called my good friend Joe. And I was a little bit nervous calling Joe. He was a newer board member. I felt comfortable talking to him about almost any topic, but this topic can be fairly charged. But Joe's enthusiasm right off the hop was really what helped us get the ball rolling. Joe never hesitated for a second. So we wanted to discuss concerns that we were being left behind as farmers in the back line of the countryside, that we were feeling less and less relevant to our customer, and less and less in touch with what our customers are worried about, as we sort of work in our silos at home and take care of our own business, and not fully engaging in the topic of the day. And then recognizing that there's more diversity in agriculture than most people realize, from production to the processing sector to our end consumer, throughout the entire value chain, that we represent an industry and a professional sector which has employees from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. And to make sure that as a checkoff collecting organization at the Beef Farmers of Ontario, that we were dealing with the concerns of all of our consumers, from every corner of the province.
So just to go back there and talk about that initial conversation, to put this into context, the George Floyd incident happened in the late winter, spring of 2020. I joined the board in February of 2020. COVID hit us in March. which meant that all those in-person board meetings and those opportunities to get to know one another on a personal basis never really happened for Jordan and I when all this happened, because everything was being done through virtual meetings. And when the George Floyd incident happened, it brought back to my core an incident that I'd seen when I was the CYFF rep down in Nebraska. And basically, friends of mine and I were at a conference. It was for agricultural young leaders from North, South, and Central America, but there wasn't a lot of participation from Canada or the US. And so the vast majority were coming from South and Central America. And if we're talking about farmers from that neck of the woods, they look a little bit different than the farmers up here. So we went out for drinks the one night, and one of the locals said, "You think tonight's fun? You guys got to come back tomorrow night." That sounds wonderful. We're always looking for a good place to go. So we went back, and it was my buddy from Bahamas whose birthday it was that day. And so we're really excited. We're going to take him out, and we show up at the door and we're met by the bouncer. And the bouncer asks for our IDs. So I hand him mine. That's good. It's my driver's license. My buddy Justin from Nova Scotia hands him his. No worries. Then Dion from the Bahamas presents his. And the bouncer asked for his passport. He said, "I don't have my passport. I just have my driver's license." And this is a direct quote. "We do not accept out-of-state licenses as evidence of your age." So I looked the bouncer in the face and I said, "Sir, I'm pretty good at history, but when did Nebraska annex Ontario?" We ended up going to a different place. I'd never seen that before. That was a first, and it really shook me. So I posted that story, and that led to that first conversation. Jordan and I were definitely on board, but I think what really took things off after that was when we spoke about it with our board leadership. Rob Lipset was our president at the time, and Richard Horn is still the executive director of BFO. They were on board about as quick as it came out of our mouths. And so then that made things a lot easier when you have that sort of buy-in from the top as well as the bottom to get some movement going on this.
So we formed a subcommittee of board and staff, or board directors and staff, and we were to draft a statement of values to bring to the board. As Joe mentioned, we brought it to the board fairly quickly after his and my discussion, and that was one of the 2 or 3 times in this process: the phone call with Joe, and then the conversation with the board, and then when we released our DEI statement. Those were the 3 times in this process that I got a little bit anxious, and you put yourself out there, and you have no idea, especially with something which has been co-opted by politics so thoroughly. You have no idea what the reaction is going to be. And the board, as Joe mentioned, was on board. Slow pushbacks on minor details here or there, but holistically, the board was encouraging for where we wanted to go and what we wanted to try to accomplish. But we had to have sort of a well thought out plan. So we formed a subcommittee. We utilized our marketing partner agency, who is in downtown Toronto and in touch with a urban based clientele. We wanted to make sure we use the right words. It took us more than 7 months to develop the statement and release it. And from day one, we kept saying over and over again, and we continue to say to this day, that our statement of values, or our DEI statement, is a living document. It's up for discussion. It's up for push and pull. It wasn't going to be a one-time statement, which then just sit out there in the ether forever and never be changed. It has to continually be there, much like our strategic plan, which our DEI statement is a core piece of our newly established strategic plan. It's a framework for which the board would make decisions through. So it's constantly in use. It's constantly top of mind, and it's not just collecting dust on a shelf. Anything to add there, Joe?
I guess the biggest thing is getting that, for as arduous a process as it was, and as much work as we put into getting that statement and releasing it, that was the easy part. Living up to it is where you know that it's important, and making it actually breathe. That gets to be the work, but it's worth it in the long run.
So here's a post of our actual statement, and some of you may have actually seen the statement. It's on our website, and it was on social media. So we won't read it verbatim today, but it's kind of an idea of where we launched and what we had in mind when we first started out. And again, there has been some tweaks made to this, and there will continue to be tweaks. But this is the statement we came up with. And for the release, I think, yeah. So here we go. So when we released it, once our subcommittee had come up with the plan and the statement of values, we shared it with our advisory counselors from every county and district in the province. Find a home on the website and put it into practice. That was sort of our initial idea. Once the statement was shared with our advisory counselors, based on their feedback, the decision was made to release it publicly after all, to make a statement on social media and to sort of let the world into the decision framework that we're trying to utilize and the work that we're trying to do. As you can imagine, the feedback was overwhelming, and it was overwhelmingly positive. We've done a lot of these speaking engagements now. Joe and I are gonna have to start charging a fee for appearances, maybe. It's just a real honor and a pleasure, a privilege to be invited to various ag organizations from around North America to speak on the work that we're doing and to have that positive feedback. There was some negative pushback from our membership. There always will be. And that has to be part of the discussion as well. It's not a statement that we're going to put out to the world and say, no, this is the way it is, and that's the way things are going to be. There has to be a push and a pull. When you talk about doing work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field, part of that diversity, equity, and inclusion that you're working towards achieving as a group includes the individuals who are not keen on this kind of thing. So we need to make sure that we're not silencing any opinions, that we're taking all feedback into consideration, and we're trying to keep an open mind to everyone's thoughts. We got a lot of positive social media feedback from around North America, a lot of interest in commodity and ag groups, which I touched on, and then a lot of requests for media outlets. So our staff and Joe and I have been fairly busy keeping up with various requests. The approach that we've kind of had is anyone who's willing to talk about this with us, we're gonna make it work. Specifically on a platform like this, when it's virtual and we can take a break in the middle of the day from farming to talk for an hour about this, it's not it's a real honor to have these invitations, and we're going to try to take up as many people as we can to push the conversation forward. Do you have anything to add, Joe?
I think you covered it there, Jordan.
So from there, we needed an action plan, and we didn't really know where to start. So the first thing we did was we worked with a firm called Bloom out of Southern Ontario, put together an 8-week comprehensive learning experience. That 8-week, we ran it up to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and some of their staff did it. We opened it up to a number of other ag organizations in Ontario, and I think some national. I think Cattle Canada had some people involved as well. We started with almost 70 participants in the 8-week program, and we finished with almost 70. Pretty well everyone who started the course finished the course, which was big for us, that people were willing to take that time, listen and learn, and to continue having the conversation and to push the work forward. We made our DEI committee of staff and board members, we made it a permanent committee. It's an open committee, so anybody who wants to sit in on it from the BFO board is allowed to, and we encourage as many voices as possible. We don't have a regular meeting cycle, but we end up meeting with some fairly regular as topics come up and different days on the calendar which are significant, and also just to talk about our policies and our programs and our activities moving forward and how the BFO can be inclusive to everybody. We made renovations to our building to increase accessibility to people from all backgrounds. Again, we've had a lot of presentations with commodity and ag sector groups. Our previous president, Rob Lipset, it was sort of his passion project in his last year as president to go hard at increasing our mental health resources and talking about mental health in agriculture and beef farming specifically. So we've been working hard at that. We've included youth reps at all levels of our organization. And we now have a youth delegate that sits in on all of our board meetings, takes part in in-camera and provides key feedback and perspective on what the BFO is trying to accomplish moving forward. We've put a lot of focus and work in on Indigenous relations and awareness. So last year we did a virtual tour and a debriefing of a Mohawk residential school here in Southern Ontario. And this year we just completed in September a corporate Indigenous training program, which was fantastic. Hard, really hard to work through. There's a lot of information which makes you question a lot about the history of Canada, but really important for us to have those discussions and to be aware of our friends and neighbors and the history that they've experienced moving forward. And then we've tried to be supportive for other organizations as well as they walk on this path. There's a few organizations we worked really closely with, like grain farmers, and the OFA, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, to carry the conversation forward. You have anything there, Joe?
Again, I think we've covered it pretty well there, Jordan.
So, and the key piece which we keep coming back over and over and over again as you do this work is you'll have producers and we just talked about this, whether or not it's in our mandate. You have producers who will ask, you know, where does it stop? Where does it finish? And what business is it of the beef farmers of Ontario to worry about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I've come to view it in sort of three fronts. Our responsibilities for diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of fall within producer education. So we educate our producers on a lot of fronts and a lot of topics. And so to have the opportunity at our AGM that some of our cattle college courses, where we have multiple rooms running at once with multiple speakers, to provide one of those rooms to have DEI education so that producers can choose, if they're so willing to go and sit in that room and learn about the beef industry and our DEI work and where we plan to go in the future. I think that producer education is huge, as well as when we do things like the DEI 8-week comprehensive learning experience in training that we just did last month, that we open it up to the leadership in our organization, which goes beyond just our board to our advisory counselors and our subcommittees, etc. The other piece that continually comes back over and over again with DEI is, as a board member, one of the things that I've learned over my 6 years of being Farmers of Ontario, as a board member, you're only as productive and professional as your staff. Our staff constantly makes us look good. You know, I can fly to Calgary. I flew to Calgary in July, and I had the presentation ready, speaker notes. Like, our staff is just top flight. And you hear it over and over again around the world. Human resources are a huge deal right now. Retaining staff is massive. And the DEI work has meant a lot to ours at the BFO. They feel comfortable to come to work every day. If something is said around the board table, they feel comfortable to take it to the right channels to have it dealt with. This is the kind of work that helps us with staff retention. And you just can't put a dollar figure on that. You just simply can't as a board member. And the third thing sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, sure. Just to carry on with that, I know we talk about just getting board members can be really difficult as well. And if we can get our members feeling comfortable and supported, then it makes it a little bit easier to potentially bring in and recruit new members down the road. A really meaningful statement made by a friend of mine, who is, I believe, the current chair of GFO still, Brendan Burney. When we were talking about this, when we were talking about the DEI, he said to me, he said, Joe, we'll get a lot farther in agriculture when we realize that DEI doesn't just include having a woman on the board. And he's so incredibly right. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to have more women on the board and more women in leadership, but we also need to be open to different life experiences, different ethnicities, etc., because they all bring different perspectives into our industry, and they're all involved in our industry in different ways. And so if we can bring a more diverse board, then that board's going to be thinking more about the industry as a whole.
For sure, yeah. And then the third piece, the DEI and how it folds into the BFO, is customer relationships. We're not a business unless people want to buy our product, which we're producing. And we know that fewer than 3% of Canadians are involved in food production. And we know that historically, people who are living in the bigger city centers in Canada grew up having grandparents who had a farm, or an uncle and aunt who had a farm, and they would go to the farm periodically and they kind of knew a bit about farming. But we know that that's not the case anymore. Like our ranch specifically, we take up the footprint of about 25 family homes, and And so we're losing that connection to our customer, and how we can stay relevant and relational and have people, when they go to the grocery store, want to seek out beef products from Ontario, because they know that the Beef Farmers of Ontario cares about who they are, where they're from, and what they're looking for. And we can walk with our neighbors and our friends through that process, and increase or sort of reestablish the relational aspect as we try to sell our product to both Ontario and the world. So what's next? So we're continuing to look actively at our organization and activities to see what we can do better, how we can weave education advocacy around diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility into existing activities and programming. We just had our big barbecue with MPPs at Queen's Park with our Ontario government a few weeks ago, and this was really the first Queen's Park barbecue I've been a part of where DEI work was part of the majority of the conversations we had with our MPPs. People want to talk about it, people want to learn about it, and they want to know how they can support us in this venture. And so then there's another touch point. So when we're speaking to a Liberal MPP from downtown Toronto, MPP Bowman, who I had a great meeting with, and the conversation is just completely different when we have that sort of that connection, and she wants to talk about what we're doing and how we're dealing or addressing our customers' requests and trying to be approachable to people from all walks of life. And it just changes the tone of the conversation. It makes it a lot less like we're just there asking for something all the time. Priority on Indigenous relations, and this is a big piece for me personally. We're on Manitoulin Island in Northern Ontario, and over 65% of our local population here is Indigenous. So, you know, specifically in Northern Ontario, the Indigenous population is the fastest growing population. There are potential for workforce, there are potential for customers, there are potential for production. You know, they could play a key role in the future of agriculture in Northern Ontario. So to making sure we're partnering with them, getting to know them, and how we can help them and support them to get involved in the beef industry. We have a seat at the table on a few projects and initiatives to move the industry forward. We're continuing to listen and learn and serve as allies and advocates to work towards making the industry more welcoming for all members of our communities. Did you have anything to add to that, Joe?
No, I think you covered the so earlier in the conversation we were talking, I was introduced as being a professor at Lambton College. All of my students are international students. The majority of them are coming from India, Nepal, etc. So sometimes I'm getting a feel for the challenge that we may have going forward, but also some of the opportunities that we have, because we have these young people who know a lot about agriculture, but they need to have an understanding of how things work in a new country. And so they can bring some new techniques, some new skills, and not only that, some new markets for our product. And that's something that we can always work towards with the immigration that we've got coming into Canada.
So the analogy that I've given at a few of these presentations is, I'll say, we used to view diversity, equity, and inclusion as just extending the table and adding more chairs, making the table feel welcome and leaving open chairs to anyone who wants to sit and talk. But what we're learning more and more is that for some people, the chairs have to look different. For some people, just walking into the room can be a challenge, and how we can meet people where they're at so that they can contribute to the conversation if they don't feel comfortable walking up and taking a seat at our table. Because we consider ourselves leaders in the beef industry, but as a board, we look fairly homogenous. And so how can we change that to represent the industry as a whole? And what does that mean, our relationships moving forward? So what we've learned through this process, so as I mentioned before, we do have more diversity than we knew we had in the beef industry. And we've been approached by quite a few people saying, you know, thank you for posting this statement. Thank you for making these efforts and for meeting us where we're at. We didn't feel comfortable talking about who we are, where we're from, or what we believe at the BFO level until this work was done, right? And so we don't know, like a lot of people are forced to sort of live double identity lives. They have, when they're at beef meetings, they feel like they have to be a certain person, but they can't be just true to who they are. So we've found that very quickly. To make the most impact in the DEI field, it has to. So a conversation that we have a few staff members from different organizations is they'll say, well, how do I start this conversation at my board? And it's a hard answer to say, but it's a hard initiative to be started at the staff level. The leadership of the board, when the leadership of the board sinks their teeth into it, it makes everything straightforward and simple. So other than, you know, trying to change people's minds or recruiting new leadership for the board, we can't be too much help in that level. But linking arms with other like-minded organizations and individuals, the bigger the group, the bigger the impact. So we've been really, like I said, we've been really appreciative with Grain Farmers of Ontario and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture for their back and forth, their willingness to work with us on this, for sending their leadership to our courses that we owe to them. It means a lot. And organizations like between Grain Farmers and the Federation of Agriculture, they touch on a much bigger group of producers, a much larger value chain than what we do just as a single commodity with the Beef Farmers of Ontario. You have to walk before you can run. And it's new to a lot of people. So just starting the conversation, taking the time to empathize with where they're coming from, and not shying, having the confidence to say feel is the right thing to do because, and carrying that conversation forward. But what's really important to note, and I've said this at the last few presentations that I've done, is our, as he calls himself, our elder statesman on the DEI committee, Craig McLaughlin, our current vice president. He'll always say it's you need to walk before you run, but you still need to keep walking. A lot of times we'll say walk before you run, and then that can lead to stagnation. We can't just sit around and talk about this. We have to be active, and we have to have movement behind it. So you do need to walk before you run, but you need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. You need to keep walking. DEI impacts all of us and is a responsibility of everyone. And again, because DEI has been so pivotal in our strategic plan moving forward, it's interweaving its way into everything that the BFO does. It's not just a woke subcommittee that everybody pats on the head and says, good job, keep doing what you're doing. It has to become the fabric of your organization for real change to happen. And as we're walking before we run, we know that sometimes this process will be slower than we hope, but we'll just keep walking as we go. Our sustainability as a sector means we need to include more quote unquote outsiders. And we touched on that about how few percentage of Canadians are involved in food production, and including outside voices in your entire value chain for your business to be sustainable moving forward, sustainable on all fronts. And your DEI work is always evolving with more to learn. Again, it's a living document. It's not set in stone, and we're doing the best we can to continue the conversation moving forward. And then there will always be pushback from somewhere. And like the pushback, and maybe Joe will add to this, but the pushback that we've experienced has been, for the most part, specific individuals who want to air specific concerns about specific aspects of the DEI. And we can address those concerns and we can have those conversations with them. Again, we want to be inclusive of their concerns as well. We don't want to shut people down. In an attempt to be inclusive, you don't want to exclude people from the conversation. But the pushback hasn't been a huge group of people holistically pushing back on the entire DEI file. And it's made it simple, straightforward moving forward for the board to really grip into it and to try to create change in our industry.
So just a little, just a little anecdote. What Jordan was talking about there with our training, and we started seeing a little bit more diversity than we realized we had. As we were getting along in the training, we noticed that one of our attendees had a pride flag hanging in the background, and somebody asked him, and yes, he was out to his neighbors and locally, but the beef industry itself, he wasn't, and he always felt like he kind of had to hold that part back. Seeing us reach out like this and seeing us try and be more inclusive made him feel like he could let us know who he was at the core. And I know I had a lot of outreach from some of my customers when they started seeing our work and being grateful for the work that we had done towards DEI. And I know that's a small microcosm, but it does show that people are noticing. And like Jordan said, there's always going to be pushback. Anytime you do something away from the norm, there's going to be pushback. Anytime you don't do anything, there's going to be pushback. So once you understand that, and once you realize that, then it's time to start having the conversation, start taking steps, and like Jordan said, don't shut people down because they don't feel included by this movement, but definitely have that conversation with them and try and come to some sort of understanding, for lack of a better term.
For our farm specifically, we're doing quite a bit of business with two groups of local Indigenous reservations. One of them is dealing with food security through food sovereignty, and so they're buying cattle and they're managing the herd themselves, and then they're doing the processing and feeding their community. And the other group is just straight up purchasing our beef and then distributing it amongst their band members themselves. So that sort of two approaches to food security. And we have a lot of conversations about, sort of one of the things I usually will ask is why us? And something as simple as having our land acknowledgement on our social media just created a touch point where they felt comfortable that they could call. Like I'll say, my granddad is an incredibly compassionate and empathetic person, but he's lived here for 80 years. He just turned 88, and he doesn't have any friends in the Indigenous community because things have been so siloed for so long. It's really easy just through one little effort to just show, you can call us and we'll answer the phone, and we're happy to do business with you, to work with you, to help you. And it wasn't exactly a painful process to put forward a land acknowledgement. So just the simple little things we keep seeing over and over again, these tiny little examples of what this work means to the people around us, that we don't just want to be left alone to do business. We want to be engaged in our neighborhoods, and our neighborhoods look different than we do. And that's awesome. There'll be a lot of opportunities to learn through that. And then, Yeah, I think this is, yeah, our final thoughts are the two quotes from Maya Angelou, which Jen puts on all the presentations. People forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And so they're little inspirational quips to finish our presentation off with. Yeah, so thanks for your time today, and be happy to take on any questions that have come up throughout the presentation.
And Jordan and Joe, we do have some questions, and I just want to share just some things that struck with me, and I took some notes on some of them, but your final statement, Jordan, about how your grandfather grew up and how you're working with the community, I think was so powerful, and how you have changed. And I think this is the world we live in, and it is very inspiring for me, Andrea, just going out there and saying, hey, you know, like let's open our minds, let's talk to people, let's figure out this balance. And our speaker earlier today, I did ask a question about how do you talk to people like without feeling like, without making them uncomfortable. And I think that's a path we have to figure out. But knowing that you're open and available and people are comfortable coming to talk to you is aspirational for me. So thank you for sharing that final thought. The few other thoughts I took down, and we did have some other questions that I'll get to, so I'll just touch on these thoughts. But I often hear, and I'm coming from what would be considered a privileged position, so within my world is, why is it my business? And I think, I don't know which one of you said, but it is, what business is it for me? And I converted the question to, why is it my business? You know, why do I care? Why do I have to care? So I think that's important, that sometimes we have to expand our own lens. And so when people came to you with that statement, the idea, and this is another statement that was made, be inclusive means not being exclusive to those who may disagree. So where you said people have disagreed, people have put challenges up, you don't close the door on them, you invite them in as well. And I think that's really important. So when you combine those thoughts and that follow through and that process you've taken with that. The other two thoughts are a little bit more not connected there, but the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You mentioned in HR with your with the BFO team, but also Joe, you mentioned your relationships that you've developed with customers and suppliers, and people just recognizing that you have that as part of your planning and that it's important to them. And so sharing that information, how that attracts and how it is important to others who maybe didn't speak up. And I think that goes to this final statement of, it allows people to be true to who they are. And the fact that, yeah, we may have masked things and all of us have done it in different circumstances, some probably more than others. And that allowing this openness allows people to be who they are. So I appreciated those parts of I appreciated your whole presentation, but that's what stuck with me. And I hope everybody has a few nuggets that came out. So we have, I don't know, 5-7 minutes. And so I'll take the easy question first from Valerie McDonald. She asked when was the statement first made public? What year? So I know you did it members and then public. What was that process again?
So it came out in January of 2021. Originally it was going to be, we released it to the advisory council in, I think, October or November of 2020. We were planning to release it at the end of December of 2020, but unfortunately the Cargill had a shutdown at their main processing plant here in Ontario. And as a result, we were getting that taken care of before we released the statement officially.
So it was officially to public early 2022?
2021.
Okay. Yeah. And but it went to members first.
That's right.
Okay. And then Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada, an organization similar to CASA with a focus on management practices. She asked, and so they have a board of directors, and so she asked, something we're struggling with is having incredible board candidates. However, members aren't electing with EDI in mind. Do you have any suggestions? Should we create dedicated positions for underrepresented groups?
and that one's a bit of a challenge. We struggle with it ourselves at BFO. If you look at our board table, we are your stereotypical middle-aged white man around the board table with one middle-aged white woman and a youth director who doesn't have a vote. So I mean, that's something we're struggling with too. The part of it is going to be with your recruitment, but even recruiting has certain limitations as well, because you can ask people, and you can ask people that you know that, but most of the time the people that you know look like you, and that always makes it a little bit more difficult as well. So I'm always a little bit reluctant to recommend having specific slots on a board, but I do know, I look at the Junior Farmers Association of Ontario, and when they were formed in 1944, they actually had a clause in their constitution that there had to be at least one woman on executive at any one point. And the first female president of JFAO happened in either the late 1940s, early 1950s. She was the only female member of the executive at that time. And we had that discussion about whether it was time to retire it when I was on the provincial board in the early 2000s. And the decision was that we were going to leave it, if for nothing else, to show the importance of having a duality in conversation. Now, that being said, the year prior to that, we had an almost all-female executive at JFAO. And so I think sometimes it's a case of recruiting. If recruiting doesn't work, then you have to look at other tools, and other tools might be coming up with those specified positions. Jordan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would approach that on two fronts. Your board members don't have to be a diverse group to have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think you can't create candidates out of thin air, and your board is going to represent your membership and who your membership is comfortable voting for. So the conversation needs to start, and that hopefully eventually the fruits will be a more diverse group voting and a more diverse group running for board positions. But that's not going to be step one in the process. It just can't be. And that leads naturally into my second point. Anybody who's ever experienced in life being a visible minority will tell you, and I've had this conversation a number of times, we really need to be cautious of tokenism. You can't have someone on the board just because of the way they look, excuse me, because then they will always be there just because of the way they look. Tokenism is something that we always to have on high alert. And so moving forward, our desire would be as a board to reflect our industry and the diversity within our industry. But we have to do a lot of walking to get to that point, and hopefully that walking can happen at a pretty good pace. And we have the addition of the youth delegate to our board was a really easy move. It's natural. They're keen. And it's sort of something that's easy to process for the industry as a whole. And then from there, then hopefully we're working towards being a more diverse group as we move forward. But yeah, if you go to the Beef Farmers of Ontario website and you look at our board, we're not exactly, covering all the demographics which are involved in beef production in Ontario.
And I would echo too, because even if you have a diversity of candidates who are diverse, it's also membership who's selecting. So there's only a point as well. So how I think what you're saying is developing your statements, encouraging those statements, having your board talk about them, making everyone feel included, and have that evolve over time. Because you run the risk of not having people in board positions when you target specific there. And I appreciate your comments about tokenism, because that can happen as well. I'll ask one last question, and it's around the statement of value of Beef Farmers of Ontario. And so that is an organizational Beef Farmers of Ontario statement. How do you see it? And we can expand beyond beef, because beef is a different like there's larger agricultural operations than beef as far as employees. But how do you see that developing at the farm level? And have you done anything on your farms to bring in EDI statements or anything like that? What is the next step? Like, organizations can lead, but where are beef farmers going? Where do you see other farms going with this leadership? Jordan's smiling at me.
Yeah, I'll start because I know Jordan's done some amazing stuff. So with me, one of the things that we've tried to do is we've tried to integrate a little bit more into the communities that we're selling into. All of our sales as of right now, every animal that's born here is sold directly to a customer. So that does give us a little bit more interaction with our customers. And as a result, we try and have that understanding of where our customers are coming from. And so whether it's somebody living in a subdivision in Windsor or living in downtown Toronto, we've sold there in the past. Or if it's somebody living on the farm, a couple concessions over because they're cash crop farmers and they still want some beef in their diet. The reality is we want to have those conversations and understand what we need to reflect when we're selling. When it comes to other steps, I think there's other steps we can do. Jordan's taken at least one that we definitely have to look at. And we don't really have a lot of hiring, so hiring's not something I see us do. I see our biggest contribution as working with the community wherever we can.
Yeah, from a beef perspective specifically, I mean, everybody on this call will know this, that it's such a capital intensive, cash tight industry that unless you inherit, it's extremely challenging to break in, right? And so our base level producers are going to be Eurocentric people who have inherited the land over time. So this is something that I think about a lot. and I don't really have a simple answer. It's a lot like the board discussion. So for instance, my wife's family farms in the Holland Marsh just north of Toronto, carrots, celeries, and onions. And so they hire a lot. They're heavily involved in a migrant worker program. And they are intentional about going above and beyond in their human resource management of their migrant workers. If they're keen on it, then they go through the process of citizenship and helping sponsor them to bring their families to Canada. And they have all these opportunities to make such a huge difference for people from impoverished areas of the world. And I think that's fantastic. But in beef, it's really hard we don't have staff outside of our family. So we've picked at the low-hanging fruit. Our family bought the land from the Indian Land Claims Act in 1884 for $50 from 100 acres. And you look at it now and it just makes you feel sick what had to happen for that to occur. But for us to produce a land acknowledgement, I mean, it's not hard work. And to just start at the core level of just saying, you know, we know that people were here before us taking care of the land, and we want to work with their descendants, and we want to be a part of the local community. But in terms of like ownership of a beef farm, I'm open to any suggestions you may have, Andrea. I would love that, and that's part of this whole process moving forward. We're talking about walking before we're running, and we keep referencing that. I keep referencing that over and over again. But we've got to keep taking steps, and how we can go about getting more diversification of our grassroots beef production in Ontario and Canada as a whole. We need to continually look at programs and speak to our neighbors and find out what their interests are and how we can work with them and see where the conversation goes. But it's challenging for sure.
And go ahead, Joe.
So one last thing, Andrea, and Jordan kind of brought this up inadvertently. Because I work by myself often, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And just last week, I was listening to, I think it was The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. And they were talking about some reconciliation that was happening on Saskatchewan farms. And it was a really interesting concept where they were letting the local First Nations communities know that they were welcome to access their land for hunting rights, etc., and basically making it shared land, I guess, for lack of a better term, with the local First Nations communities. And that's really something I've thought about since I saw it. But how to put it into operation while still respecting the neighborhood around me as well is where we have to find that line. And I'll share with you that podcast, Jordan, if I can find it.
So we're gonna move along, and I appreciate Jordan and Joe. You're the practical, boots on. We've done this, we've implemented. So you're that piece of today. We had our education with Shalyma, I hope I got that right, and Wendy, and now we have you here. And so we're going to move into our panel discussion. And I was going to say one thing. Quite often, the theming of today, Joe, you may have said, Andrea, if you have the answers. It's like, no, the reason we pick these themes is because Andrea is looking for the answers. And so I figure if I'm looking for the answers, there's got to be at least one more person who's looking for those answers. And so that's sometimes where the theming comes out for these forums and conferences and events. So we're going to move into our panel discussion. And so I don't know if I actually officially said who I was when I started. So I am Andrea with CASA. I have my counterpart here. Robin is joining. She's going to lead the panel. She's been listening in today, gathered some thoughts and questions, and going to take the four of you through and just kind of wrap up today and bring your brains together, and hopefully we can get some of those answers I'm seeking. So thank you. And Robin, it is all yours.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks to all of you folks today. Incredible presentations and incredible discussions. So I have some questions. I don't know if they're going to be hard hitting or easy or if they're even answerable. So, but I just would like to say welcome. And if there's any questions out there from our audience, please feel free to ask. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And Megan will poke me if I don't notice. So please feel free to ask questions or follow-ups to anything that I might have to say. So I guess we'll hop into it. Something that was really interesting was I was listening to these presentations and I got thinking, I was like, I haven't looked at the census of ag for a while. So I thought I'd go hop on there and just take a look and see what the census was saying lately. And yeah, Canada's farming backgrounds were changing, right? So according to the 2021 Census of Ag, over 60% of Canadian farmers are over the age of 55. So we've got an aging population of farmers. 6.9% of Canada's farm population were immigrants in 2021. Female farm operator numbers increased for the first time since 1991. And then in 2016, that was the last time I could find numbers around Indigenous farmers. The number of Aboriginal agricultural operators in 2016 increased by 53% compared with 1996. So it's pretty exciting to see that the face of Canada is changing, but also the face of agriculture is changing, and maybe not as fast as maybe some of our more populated areas, but we definitely see that we do have more folks and different experiences and lived experiences coming to farm and farming in Canada. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting background to be like, this is important to us, and for those of us that work with farmers and farm families and farming communities, that we are seeing these changes, and that it's really important to be open to those changes and be there to support folks, and meet them where they're at. Jordan, something that you said was really struck me, and in thinking of Wendy's presentation about psychological safety. When you were talking to Joe, and you felt safe to, you were a little hesitant after some hesitancy to talk to him. You also spoke about being anxious and nervous, bringing the DEI initiative to your board, and having leadership was really important that was supportive of the initiative. So, even as privileged folks, I count myself as being very, very privileged. Some of us can be a bit fearful, about moving equity, diversity, inclusion needle forward, or that conversation forward. And even though we know it's the right thing to do. So I was just going to throw this out to the panel. Why do you think we are afraid? And how can we acknowledge that fear, respect that fear, and move past it to really lean into that movement forward? Anybody?
Well, I guess I can speak first. As a person who is generally a people pleaser, I consider myself fairly empathetic and a good ability to read a room, I get very uncomfortable when I feel like an outsider, which is quite ironic. Through all the DEI work that we've done, I realize more and more and more that I'm very much on the inside. Yeah, I deal with a lot of anxiety myself as it is on a day-to-day basis, whether that's farming, parenting, being a spouse, whatever. But when I am bringing forward a fairly new topic to an organization of people who I respect, such as the Beef Farmers of Ontario, who we're sort of like-minded individuals on the front of beef production, but we're not all that familiar with our stances on things outside of those meetings. We don't have a long history of being friends. Then it gives you this tight stomach, sweaty palm feeling of you never know how people are going to react, and that potential kickback. To me, it effectively means nothing. I can't get kicked off of the board at the Beef Farmers of Ontario for bringing forward a topic like this. I was elected to be on the board. The membership put their trust in me when they elected me for the board. But you don't want everybody else to be thinking, well, who is this sort of lunatic who's bringing something brand new? This person who's bringing a completely new concept to the Beef Farmers of Ontario. They're coming at things from the wrong angle, or that sort of potential judgment when you put yourself out there. That was sort of my main source of anxiety. Now, in this instance, I was finding very quickly that those anxieties were from, personal insecurities, as opposed to, I wasn't actually an outsider like I thought I was when the board jumped on it so quickly. But then, that hammers down even harder why we need to do this work, because there are people who actually are outsiders and don't feel welcome. And so how you change the tone of the conversation so that it's not just people battling their insecurities like Jordan, who has his anxieties anyways, but that everyone's welcome to bring their thoughts and concerns in the beef industry to the Beef Farmers of Ontario, no matter what walk of life they're coming from. and establishing that tone as leaders in the industry. There's always that quote from that, hokey Disney movie, Remember the Titans, attitude reflects leadership, right? And so if you're serving on a board as a leader of your commodity group in your jurisdiction, you're helping to set the tone. And so what does that tone look like?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jordan, we lost you for a second there. Apologies, I talked over you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that about why we might not feel safe as privileged folks to speak, up about EDI, issues and moving that needle forward? Wendy, do you have any thoughts on why we might not feel psychologically safe to do so?
Well, in thinking about it, and I had a personal experience with a social media post that was put up on behalf of my organization, and I had a lot of backlash as a result of it. But I think partially, as also privileged white Canadian, I'm scared to say the wrong thing. And I don't want to offend anybody. I'm very respectful. And I want, but there's always a challenge. So what if I say the wrong thing? When I refer to my friend who is from India, do I refer to, is she Indo-Canadian? To me, it doesn't matter. She's my friend. But if you refer, it's challenging with the EDI, and I mean, I think it's important and it's crucial, but I think others like me, the fear comes from, what if I say the wrong thing and I offend somebody in my approach? Then what's going to happen? And being able and comfortable to ask questions in a respectful manner while honoring people's differences, you learn how to say something without offending people. But everybody's threshold is different. And I don't think we're ever going to have the right answer that you can apply for all of the time. So it invokes fear.
And that actually brings up Shalyma's presentation when you talked about why are you asking these questions and how do you ask those questions in a respectful way, and what are your intentions? So that actually really brings that quite full circle. Shalyma, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes back to part of how I opened up my session and with regards to the guiding principles for engagement and those 4 statements that I take from human systems dynamics. It talks about judgment. We could be very judgmental of others, but also of ourselves. And, Wendy, you talked about like not wanting to say the wrong thing. We will say the wrong thing. It's inevitable that at some point we're going to say the wrong thing. And so I think, not getting stuck in that judgment of ourselves in those moments is really key. Going into those moments with openness and that vulnerability to say, I don't know the answers to all of these things. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to do my own learning. But I also am open to being corrected. And, if we are in that position of privilege, which comes with either a position of leadership quite often, or could come with the ability for people to listen to us or have some authority placed on the words that we have to say, that in itself is a privilege, that people will listen and watch us and want to emulate perhaps how we show up as leaders. And so if we're showing up in those moments with vulnerability, we're demonstrating that it's possible to do so. And that fear of showing up with vulnerability, getting things wrong, finding out that maybe we've made a mistake in the past and wanting to correct that, starts to slowly dissipate if we can demonstrate that it's okay to be corrected, okay to, show that we've said the wrong thing and own up to that and do better next time. Show that we could be self-reflective in our own thinking, in, how we want to show up and change our actions. So, that fear is certainly all encompassing, but I encourage people to recognize that we all are fearful. You're not the only person who is fearful of saying the wrong thing. And so the more we can lean into accepting that that's just part of the reality when we're speaking around equity, diversity, inclusion, the more comfort we can feel in knowing that we are all journeying together and we'll all be learning together. So yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. Something else that we that was brought up that was pretty interesting is, you know, when we're accustomed to privilege, equity might feel unfair. That's directly from you, Shalyma, this morning. Do you think that that feeling of unfairness is a barrier with folks that have that privilege into hesitancy to adopt EDI practices and moving that needle forward? What do you, Jordan, Joe, what do you think of that in your experience, you know, with BFO? What do you think of that idea?
I think probably the best way that I've heard it said, and Shalyma, unfortunately, I didn't hear your presentation, but I sometimes the reticence of those that have privilege to DEI conversations is more what's going to happen to me when we're trying to level the playing field and provide opportunities for those who should be able to achieve them, but for whatever the situation is, are not able to. And so that's always a really difficult thought, is understanding that no, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we can get, you know, the best of the best, or get the right people in the right spot. But sometimes those people were shoehorned into there before simply because they needed a person or they needed a body, and because they went along with what was expected and what was anticipated of that organization, they fit where maybe somebody who was better, who had better credentials or who had better possibilities for the organization was passed over in the past, simply because they didn't fit the mold, so to speak.
I think I think it's fairly crucial experientially. What we've found at the Beef Farmers of Ontario is sort of institutionally, as you embrace these topics and you normalize these conversations, it creates a dynamic where people can set their fears on the back burner a little bit. One of the things that our DEI committee has implemented, and it actually wasn't because of our DEI committee, it was because of our president, who sat in on a meeting. He sits on a lot of our meetings, Jack, and he has implemented at all of our board functions a 2-minute mindful reflection, moment of mindful reflection. It's on the agenda. And so we take 2 minutes at the beginning of every meeting and we sit quietly. Some of us will be praying, some of us will be thinking, some of us will be fidgeting. But the premise of that 2-minute block is to set aside your preconceived notions, potential negative energies or frustrations that have been percolating in your brain prior to our board discussions for the day. To adopt a status of open-mindedness. And I can't speak holistically, I can just speak personally. It's made a huge difference for me. You know, if my kids were a real pain that morning, if getting on the school bus felt like World War III and IV combined, then I can still take those 2 minutes and be like, okay, we're here to talk about opportunities and to make a difference in the beef industry today. You know, the fact that my 6-year-old was acting like a 2-year-old doesn't need to have a negative connotation on how I approach the agenda, which we're about to discuss. And so as you set that tone, just a little thing, which the board now does, to me anyways, personally, allows me to set those fears aside, that when something new comes to the table, your initial knee-jerk reaction isn't to say, no, that's impossible. Yeah, it can seem kind of hokey, but very impactful nonetheless.
I don't think it is. Intention is always so important, and moving into things with intention, right? And being mindful and having that's a brilliant strategy. I think I need to employ that on my day-to-day life in the mornings and just be like, yeah, my husband was acting like a 2-year-old and getting him off to work. I need those 2 minutes, right? So that's actually really great. So that you are open to those changes, and maybe encouraging other folks, to take that time to be open before having those conversations to DEI. I think that's brilliant. I think. Shalyma, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. So I also have to say I love that 2-minute mindful practice, Jordan. Whenever we're personally dealing with bias or wanting to counter bias, having that moment to pause could be so helpful. So building that into practice with meetings is a really great way to even just start that process as a group together. The other thing I will say, I caught just the last bit of your presentation. So I'm assuming here that it sounded like there was a youth representative position created for a board of some sort. And so when we think about, your question, Robin, around, well, is there sometimes a reticence to change because people worry about how that could impact them versus like the larger, broad strokes of leveling the playing field? Even creating a position that is mindful of the fact that generations are changing. You share some of the stats around the field and the industry coming up, and there certainly are changes happening. But when we create policy that kind of moves along that change and allows people that haven't traditionally had that voice to participate in this and perhaps get a bit more involved in processes that they might not have had introductions to before or a lengthy history of familiarity with, it means that they can better participate and we're hearing more quickly from them. So from someone who may have had access for generations to these processes, it may feel unfair that, well, we had to go through this process to get on the board. How come this group doesn't have to, or how come this group doesn't? But the real impact is that if I have not had to do that, it's because I have a history of familiarity with understanding how the board works and how this industry works, which is not the case for everyone. So correcting that imbalance means providing slightly different entry points for folks so that we can hear those voices a lot quicker and have them have a major impact, a more positive impact on how we operate as organizations much more quickly. So it absolutely can feel unfair. And I think, Joe, you mentioned that people are really worried about, like, well, what will that mean for me? So those are the moments where we could, institute that mindful 2-minute just for ourselves. And before we react to what we hear, take a moment to pause and think about, okay, if I wasn't in my shoes, how might this appear to somebody else? Maybe I actually just need to have that conversation with someone. Maybe I should have a conversation with a youth representative to get to know them more and understand what was their intention or what drew them to this role. And I could guarantee that in that conversation, you're probably going to learn a lot more that comes outside of our assumptions than if we just make the assumption about why or how this impacts me or what could be the outcome. The more conversations we have, the more we'll really break down some of those walls that could create reticence to change, which is natural. A lot of people don't like change. It's not always easy to change. But I think having more discussions about it and more conversations, asking better questions to really understand those folks that may not have always had a voice, but now through processes like what is being offered here can have that voice, we could better understand the more positive impact of these changes and get on board a lot more quickly.
That's fantastic. This is a bit of a broad question, but something that, made me think. How do psychologically safe environments foster equity, diversity, and inclusion? And is there room for both privileged and less privileged folks to find ways to ask questions, bring up concerns, and feel heard as organizations work more towards inclusivity? So I think we kind of talked about that a little bit already just now, but I think that tying those two together really makes a lot of sense in my mind. Maybe I'm completely off the topic, but I'd be really curious to hear what you have to say about this. Wendy, do you have any thoughts around that?
I think Shalyma can probably speak to that better than I, or perhaps already did, because it's the psychologically safe workplace, if you heard anything, it allows people to have those open conversations without fear. And so that's a big, I mean, it allows people to have any variety of conversations without fear of retaliation, or, you know, approaching all of it with empathy and with understanding and inclusion. So I think DEI is one more topic that we need to address all of that with. I mean, you're right, that is a huge big can of worms, that you're a very broad question that you're asking, Robin. But I think having a psychologically safe workplace includes having the opportunity to have open conversation that's honest and empathic and respectful, and all of those different things, treats people with civility and with respect and with dignity. So really, there shouldn't be a lot of boundaries placed around what the topics can be. So, you know, something that could potentially be uncomfortable, like DEI, which often is for many, that should be an opportunity for an open forum and open communication.
So at BFO, I know we kind of have already talked about this, but what's your experience with that and that psychologically safe, you know, area? Like, you did talk about that with your staff feeling, you know, safe to come to work and safe to be who they are and those sorts of things. But can you speak more to that idea of being that safe place for these conversations to come out?
Well, I think that when the DEI becomes part of the framework of your organization, when it's part of the package for board education, or for board uploading, when we get a new board member on elected, and they're being trained on being a BFO board member, that a piece of that is the DEI work, and that it's one of the core pillars of our strategic plan moving forward. I think it sort of disarms the conversation. When it's an institutional priority, it creates that safe workspace, and just reminding our board members that your staff is being paid to come to it's part of their job to come to our meetings and participate in our meetings, and nobody, when they're doing part of their job, should feel uncomfortable by things said in the atmosphere. So we can just walk into the room as a bunch of farmers and spout off about farming, but we need to make sure that everybody who's at the table feels safe to be there. And so we're working. I would like to do more work on it, but we're working on the framework to put in place as to how to call out and call in, how to create a dynamic where anytime something is inappropriate is said, we're dealing with it in a professional manner. You know, we're not canceling people for saying the wrong thing, because part of the fear is walking in and being subjected to, even microaggression, macroaggression, whatever. Part of the fear is, as we mentioned, is saying the wrong thing. We can address both of those fears through having a formal framework where if something wrong is said, it's dealt with in an empathetic and educational way, in a tone which is let's all grow together, as opposed to saying you can't say that, and so I think we, Joe, hopefully Joe agrees with me, but I think we still have work to do in terms of formalizing that framework. We've done some work on it. We've presented it to the board, but we need to continue to maintain that framework so that everybody who walks in on that, third Monday of the month at 8:30 in the morning knows if something is said that's uncomfortable for me, I can address it in a way which isn't going to ostracize me from the group, which isn't going to make me feel even more different than, and so, yeah. And then as you work towards that common goal institutionally, those fears should be subsided a little bit. It should become naturally, you can sit around and talk about DEI all day, but if you don't have the proper framework in place, then they're just airy-fairy concepts. You have to have a very pragmatic approach for your organization to follow through step by step so that change is created, and positive change.
That's really interesting and really good. I like that practical, approach and that concept. I think that's fantastic. Shalyma, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I love, Jordan, that you talked about calling in and like that difference between calling in versus calling out, because there's very different ways to speak up when you hear something, right? And that's certainly something that we've talked about with a lot of different folks is how can you use opportunities where mistakes happen to educate and hold people in that positive regard that they can do better next time. So as organizations, if we are, doubling down on the fact that we know people can grow from these opportunities, then we're setting that expectation that people will, but we're also setting the expectation with employees that they can count on us to ensure that policies are upheld and that action does happen when something inappropriate happens. I think another thing to be mindful of is as your industry is continuing to grow and new people are coming from different backgrounds to join in this industry in a different way, there will always still be the first of a particular group to enter into a field or one of very few. So if someone is coming into an organization or into an industry being the first of or one of very few, there's another layer to consider when it comes to psychological safety. So if, for example, we are addressing issues of gender within our organization, as someone who is a Black woman, are we also talking about ethnicity and gender? Are we making sure that those things are both being considered in our policies? So just as an example, when we think about some of the research that was done around psychological safety, I'm not sure if this was shared earlier in that section or not, but looking at just BIPOC employees, so anyone who identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, within Canada, 36% of colleagues who fell in this category felt that people deliberately acted in a way to undermine their efforts at work. 49% of people that identified with this category felt that making a mistake at work would be held against them. And we could look at organizations and just general culture, and many people might experience that within a negative organizational structure. But that added layer of either ethnicity or color or another diversity for yourself could also put in fear that specifically for me, how I look or the categories that I'm part of, it could be even more detrimental to myself, to the people that I represent, if I make a mistake. So it's not just the culture of the organization, it could also be those added layers of identity. So we have to just do that extra work to make sure that people that are outside of what we may typically or have traditionally seen within these industries do feel safe to share those aspects of identity that could create an even more psychologically unsafe or uncertain space for them. So how could we make sure that people feel more certain that as an organization, we're taking their diversity concerns seriously? And that's part of the policies that we're creating, part of what's considered in how we speak up, how we address when issues do happen. So, yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Intersectionality, right, is a whole other, conversation as well on top of DEI and psychologically safe workplaces. That's fantastic.
And sorry, I just
wanted
to add one thing. Sorry, just to remember to set the tone that this is an opportunity to learn, grow. It's not a chore. It's not like, oh no, here we go, we got to talk about DEI again. Like we're providing our membership, our organization, our board members, our staff an opportunity to become better citizens, better neighbors, better friends. It's one of the coolest parts of serving on the board is the opportunity to grow in a different way. We don't just talk about who's using what brand of hay baler all the time. There's more to life than just farming. So it's just sort of see it as an opportunity as opposed to a drain or a negative.
And there's Jordan talking about intentional behaviors again and being intentional about things. This is great. I'm just so impressed. It's so interesting. And so, moving on from organizations, the organizations we work with, and now talking maybe more about farms, and agriculture in general. How do you think, someone like CASA, for example, like Canadian Agriculture Safety Association, could encourage and support EDI and psychologically safe workplaces on farms? What are some tips or advice to start that conversation in those areas? And what are some anticipated challenges? And maybe Joe and Jordan, you guys might be really great to speak to this for both the farmers and their farm employees and farm families.
So I guess first and foremost, we can talk about the HR side of things. Not every farm's going to be hiring people, but there's so many different opportunities to look at bringing in different mindsets, whether it's your experts. I mean, if you're a crop farmer, you're probably dealing with an agronomist. Does that agronomist need to be somebody who grew up down the road, or is it possible that there's somebody who's going to have a different perspective coming from a different area who has moved into your territory? Dealing with your elevators or your auction yards or your farm input suppliers, all of those places potentially could be bringing in new employees that look or have a different background than what you're used to. If we're looking at it from, say, somebody like me who deals more directly with the public when it comes to selling our product, obviously we want to be able, and I've said it before, I'm a capitalist at heart. I want to be able to sell to as many people as possible. The way I can sell to as many people as possible is if I develop an understanding of my customers. And if all my customers look like me, there's a lot less people that I can deal with than if I'm willing to educate myself and learn about different communities, different needs, different preferences. And then I can work with them and work to provide for them. And that's something at a local farm level. And so that can help as well, because there's other knowledge that can be brought from different communities and different ethnicities on how to care for different things. So anything that we can do to help improve our management of whether it be our crops, our cattle, our land, let's look at those opportunities and not turn away from them simply because it can't work here. It very well could, and maybe it didn't happen here before because we just weren't having that conversation.
Yeah, that's actually, you're leaning into public trust a little bit then, right? That whole idea that, DEI can help improve public trust, and then have, folks that might criticize farming might now have a better understanding of farming and might now increase profitability on farms and that sort of a thing. Sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, yeah, DEI, obviously, based on the name, it's not a unidimensional thing, right? And you're going to have different entry points, different people are going to feel comfortable with. Mental health in agriculture has become a really, in the last, I think, 5 years specifically, has really become a topic which people are willing to discuss. And so that's a simple entry point to the DEI file. Let's talk about mental health on farms. Let's talk about different anxiety conditions, different things people are struggling with. Then you can talk about your neighborhood, you can talk about land usage, you can talk about our Indigenous populations and their relationship with the land and our relationship with the land and how we can work together. And then there can be some more contentious, politicized, posting things on during Pride Week. So there's all different entry points where we can start the conversation. And as we talk about walking before we run, we're all starting our walk at a different starting line. And so finding that commonality and that point where people are comfortable to start the discussion and then working with them, as opposed to ramming stuff down people's throats and saying, this is how you believe it, this is what we're going to believe from now on, so deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about, the aging farmer population. That's a great entry point, talking about, elder farmers and disabilities that happen as we might age. That's a good starting point from my perspective. That's something we can talk about the safety and health aspect of that as well. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I don't come from the farming background, so I can't speak specifically to that piece. But I think the only thing I would say here is, Robin, you talked about how even Indigenous populations of farming are growing quite quickly as well. And Joe, you mentioned, like, as you're learning from people, like, you could provide better services, better products for different groups. And the only thing I would change in that is really thinking about it as with different groups, right? We could probably learn a lot from many of the Indigenous farmers that are continuing to enter in more formally into this space and are being more documented. And so there's a great opportunity there to work across the various groups of people that are entering into farming may not have always traditionally been there in such a formal way, to learn with each other and include those voices as you make decisions that will impact your ability to sell to more groups of people. So really, I would say just that tiny reframe of how can we do this with others and include people in, really voicing what they see as opportunities for change, and then being part of that change is really key. Yeah, that's all I would add to that.
Well, that's great. I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat below. We would love to hear from you as well.
Just to follow up on Shalyma's comment there, one thing that on the BFO website that I'm very proud to point out when I have the opportunity is our staff have worked with chefs from different ethnic backgrounds and that sort of stuff to develop different recipes using beef according to different ethnicities and different backgrounds. And so, Shalyma, your comment about working with communities, I love that change in perception and change in verbiage. And I think that's one example of what you're talking about. And I really appreciate that.
No, that's fantastic. Jordan just messaged everybody that he has kids about to jump off the school bus. So he's just going to see how the next few minutes go. So fair enough. total respect for that. How is organizations like CASA and a lot of the organizations that have joined us today that are concerned about safety and health on the farm is the most inclusive way to address and figure out what barriers to inclusivity there are? Not just for those that we serve, that is the farmers and the producers and their families and farm workers, but also to those that serve that population. So the staff, the membership, the board members, the advisory groups. Would anybody like to speak to that question?
Sorry, I'm not really clear on your question.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I spoke really fast too. I apologize. So we're CASA. We're with health and safety right on the farm, and we want to be inclusive to figuring out, or we want to figure out what those barriers are to inclusivity, but not just for the farmers, farm families, farm workers, but also for our membership, our staff, our board members, our advisory groups. So there's kind of two different areas that we might need to think about internally: functional boards, functional staff, and then of course those that we serve. So what are some approaches that we could take to figure out what those barriers are, and how can we be respectful of those questions? It's a very broad question once again, but something that I think I'm interested in.
I'm happy to jump in and just say initially some thoughts that come to mind, and really the main thing is to ask. I don't know how many different groups we work with that have those questions, and then it's just so obvious. You just have to ask, and that can be done through surveying. It can be done through short, small focus groups, through having interviews, creating processes that people can share back their experiences, their feedback, again with that psychological safety in mind. So the more that we tell people why we're asking these questions, that a fear of how is this going to be used could be alleviated, and people may be much more open to share, here are the barriers that I personally am experiencing as a member, or here are the barriers that I'm personally experiencing in my desire to be on the board, or my desire to partake in this industry in a much more meaningful way. But really it comes down to data and we can't get that data unless we ask the questions, both from understanding real experiences, but also from what are the numbers? How can we quantify what inclusion looks like, what the ability to speak up or not looks like across the different demographics that may be present within our industry? And the more concrete data you have there, the better you can really respond to those needs that have been addressed in gathering that data. So ask.
Just ask. Just straight up ask. Yeah, that's fair.
I'm happy to help with that if you need
No,
help.
that's great. Well, and because that question can sometimes be uncomfortable. Like I think about, asking, someone that might have an invisible disability, and maybe they're not really comfortable with, talking about that invisible disability out loud. And how do we, go for, go forward from that, right? And asking those questions in a really respectful way. But I think it comes down to probably intention, more than than anything, right?
And it also comes down to building that process of asking into your culture. So as you bring someone on board, what types of questionnaires are you giving people to document the types of holidays that people want or that they celebrate or that would be important to them? What types of questions are part of your natural intake questionnaires to understand the accommodations that people may need or may want to ask for? And there could be many barriers, particularly around accommodations, whether it's around getting a doctor's note or getting a lot of documentation. And so how are we reducing those barriers so people don't feel like they have to prove every word that they say about themselves? They're the experts in who they are and what they need. And so are we creating that space to show that we believe people, that we trust them? We're trusting them because we've hired them. So let's demonstrate that by actually making processes a little bit easier for people to partake in sharing that feedback, and so that it will have an impact on what they experience. But the more you can embed that into your everyday practices, so whether it's the questionnaire that people enter in as they become part of a board, asking those questions so we understand those demographics that are coming in, or as someone who's coming in as an employee, or then feedback forms for people and clients that you're servicing. What types of questions are you asking there that you can relay back to how you treat people, how you provide good customer service, the types of questions you ask in a client meeting to make them, much more better received by the people that you're working with as well. Yeah, they have to be built into your process. So yeah.
No, that's great. We do have a question in the question and answer section. How can we avoid a white savior echo chamber when facing the reality that many boards are white male dominated?
Take a chance on this.
This is a safe space, Joe.
Yes, and I understand that, and I guess I had this conversation a while back. We were talking about another marginalized group, and I said, sometimes I myself I feel a little bit awkward being that person to go in and start the conversation on DEI because I am a white, cis, straight Christian man. Like I check every box when it comes to privilege when you look at it from the outside. And so I always want to be careful of having that view of being the white savior. And I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to make it abundantly clear that we need allies in this. We need allies 100% of the time. And if we look at ourselves as allies and as supporters, and we make it abundantly clear that that is our role, instead of that we are taking over this conversation, I think that's the first thing that we need to do. Is to say, look, I'm stepping in as an ally here, or in a situation where there is a marginalized community, we have a friend or a contact who's in that community, reaching out to them and saying, okay, this is something that I'm concerned about. Am I on the right track here? Should I say anything, or should I step back and amplify you when you say it? What is the right approach here? And I think the biggest thing is that we kind of check our ego at the door, and we understand that as allies, our role is to support. And that's, once I got my head around that, I felt a lot more comfortable dealing with some possibly thornier issues moving forward.
I love what you shared, Joe, particularly in the questions that you posed around, you know, what is my role here? And is it to say something in this moment, or is it to support you, to amplify your voice? And like really asking, what is the best way to show up as an ally in those moments? And sometimes it might be called to step up on behalf of someone. Perhaps someone says, I would like you to speak on behalf of that. And to your point, you need allies from a wide breadth of different backgrounds to be able to support change across the multiple different ways that we show up within this community. And so it's, you know, when we think about that savior mentality, that happens when one person feels that they know everything and that they have all the answers. And so to your point of going in with that reduced ego, that helps to really mitigate that risk of that happening, being able to show, I don't know everything. And so I'm looking for the best way to support this work and support the groups for which I am showing up as an ally for. I think the other thing here is that there's always that balance between tokenism and having someone, you know, share their input. And so you might ask me, I have one particular perspective, a particular view that is going to be really helpful for me participating in the industry. But someone who looks exactly like me, who comes from a very similar background, may have gone to a very different school and has a very different perspective. So it could be, you know, very different nuances that could change our perspective. And so I think one thing is really key is never feeling like you have to lump everyone from a particular marginalized group or background into that one answer. You're going to have different perspectives from, you know, many different people who are still coming from like one group. You might have 10 different perspectives from 10 different Black women in the agricultural space, right? And that's okay. So just know that allyship is required in order to move anything forward. So if it is an issue around race or ethnicity, you need white people in that fight as well. If it is, you know, a challenge around neurodiversity, you need neurotypical people and those who are neurodivergent as well to work on the challenges that people experience within workplaces. So you need the breadth of society to really move things forward. And as long as we are all entering into the conversation, knowing that neither one of us has all the answers, we're going to have much more productive dialogue around what the solutions are and ensuring that everyone who is impacted by the solutions can contribute to what they are.
That's fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you all for a great panel discussion. You guys were awesome and very interesting, and thank you for answering my sometimes rambling questions. I appreciate that a lot. And I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea to just finish out our day. Andrea, you're muted.
It got me at least every session. I do it at least once. Thanks everyone. I really appreciate Robin leading the panel, our panelists who shared such great insight and were very vulnerable in sharing some of their thoughts and making sure that we could understand something new, gain perspective and grow knowledge. I said earlier, I quite often when I'm seeking knowledge, that takes on a theme of the day, and it has grown, and it's grown my knowledge. I still have lots to learn, but I really appreciate everyone here today. So thinking about tomorrow is day 2 of our virtual conference. In the morning, we have 2 sessions. We will have Robin Anderson back with us with Colleen Drool from the Injury Prevention Center. Sorry, had a mind bomb there. And they're going to be talking about our Canadian agricultural injury reporting stats. Tomorrow is the stat day, the injury day. It's not necessarily the fun day. But then we also have Angie coming from the University of North Dakota. She did a fabulous presentation at the ISASH conference and is coming to share that information again, looking at traumatic injuries with farmers, but really looking at how maybe we can prevent those through her research. So excited about that. And of course, we finish off the day with the most exciting thing, which is the CASA's annual general meeting. So I would encourage all members to attend so that we can have our general meeting and have that done for the year. Lots of good information there, and we're excited about that. I really, again, had a great day today. I thank everybody for joining. Those who are in the audience, I hope you gained some knowledge, maybe had a few moments of self-reflection, because I think there were lots of opportunities to think about that. And again, to our speakers here today, I appreciate the knowledge you have shared. So I think we are good. Tomorrow we start at 10. It's the same Zoom link. So have an excellent afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the country, and see you tomorrow.